Tonight we're pulling over at some of the loneliest, most haunted rest stops in Texas. Places where weary travelers thought they'd find safety, but instead found something else waiting in the dark. From eerie lights, flickering along desolate highways to terrifying encounters with things that should not exist, get ready for 20 of the creepiest true stories from Texas rest stops that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the glow of the streetlights. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting at these rest stops is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. The night we pulled off Highway 281 near George West, I was already fighting the kind of fatigue that makes your eyelids feel like they're coated in lead. My wife, Marcy, sat curled up in the passenger seat, her legs tucked beneath her like she always did when she was trying to sleep in the car. The dash clock said 12:43 a.m., and the road had become a dark ribbon cutting through miles of nothing. Out there it was mesquite, scrub, and empty sky. The kind of Texas landscape that swallowed you whole if you thought too long about just how alone you really were. We'd been driving back from San Antonio after visiting her sister, and I kept telling myself I'd push onto Corpus before stopping. But the gas gauge was leaning low and my head felt heavier with each mile. So when the green reflective sign announced a rest area ahead, I pulled off almost without thinking. The place was lit by those tall, humming floodlights that make everything look too pale, too sharp. The lot was empty except for one 18-wheeler parked way at the far end with its running lights dimmed. The building itself was squat, concrete, the kind of state-maintained restroom that always smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. Off to the side, by the edge of the lot, stood a payphone booth. Not one of the glass kind, just a battered metal shell bolted to the ground, the receiver hanging by its cord like a dead limb. I hadn't seen anyone use a payphone in years. Hell, I wasn't even sure they worked anymore. I cut the engine and Marcy stirred. "Where are we?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Rest stop," I said. "Go back to sleep. Just need to stretch and hit the bathroom." She mumbled something I didn't catch and turned her face against the seat, already gone again. I stepped out into the night. It was warm, the air heavy, with the faint smell of dust and oil. Crickets rasped in the grass, and I could hear the low whine of the truck's engine cooling somewhere far across the lot. The sound of my boots on the pavement echoed louder than it should have. That's when the payphone rang. It was so sharp, so sudden that I flinched. The sound was tinny and insistent, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Ring. I stood frozen, one hand still on the truck door. There was no one else around. The trucker hadn't moved. The lights buzzed overhead, and the payphone just kept ringing, shrill and steady. I don't know why I walked toward it. Curiosity, maybe. Habit. Something in the human brain that hates the idea of a ringing phone going unanswered. I found myself standing in front of it before I even realized I'd moved. The metal was streaked with rust, the buttons grimy, the receiver worn slick by countless hands that hadn't been here in years. I hesitated, then lifted it to my ear. The line hissed with static. Then a voice said my name. Not just my name. My nickname. "Buddy boy," it said. Soft and close, like someone whispering against the receiver. My father used to call me that when I was little. Before bed, before baseball games, before the cancer ate him down to a shadow and finally took him away when I was 12 years old. Nobody else ever called me that. Not once in the years since. Froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My mouth went dry. "Who is this?" I whispered. Static, crackling, and then the voice again. "Buddy boy, you need to come home now, it's late." The tone was gentle, patient. My father's tone, my father's voice. For one wild second, I thought maybe I'd lost my mind. That fatigue had cracked something in me and I was dreaming, on my feet. But the words kept coming, low and sure. "Come on now, don't keep me waiting." I pulled the receiver away, staring at it like it had teeth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned back toward the truck, half expecting Marcy to be awake and staring at me, but the cab was dark, her shape still slumped against the window. The rest stop lot was empty, silent. I should have hung up and walked away, but instead I pressed it back to my ear. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "Dad, is that you?" The line hissed, and then came a sound I hadn't heard in 25 years. His laugh. Low, warm, but with that rasp he'd always had from too many cigarettes. "That's right, buddy boy, you found me." The floodlights buzzed louder overhead, my skin prickled. Something about hearing that laugh in the middle of a deserted rest stop at nearly 1 a.m. made my chest go cold. "You're dead," I whispered. "You died." The laugh faded. The voice shifted, darker now. "You left me. And now you're late. Too late." The static flared so loud I winced, and then the line went dead. Just silence. I slammed the receiver back into its cradle and stumbled away, my legs weak. The air felt wrong, like it had thickened, and I couldn't shake the sense that someone was standing just behind me. I forced myself to turn. No one was there. Just the empty lot, the shadows stretching out toward the highway. But I couldn't ignore it. The feeling of eyes on me, heavy and fixed. I got back in the truck fast, locking the doors before I even sat down. Marcy stirred again. "Everything okay?" she mumbled. "Yeah," I lied. "Just bathroom's closed. Let's get back on the road." She didn't question it, just rolled back over. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. I checked the mirror once before pulling out. The payphone stood there under the lights, silent now. But for just an instant, I swear I saw a figure standing next to it. A tall man in a flannel shirt. His head tilted, watching me. His outline flickered like a bad signal, there and gone. My chest clenched so tight I couldn't breathe. Then the road pulled me back into the dark, the truck's headlights carving a tunnel through the empty miles. We didn't stop again until Corpus. I didn't tell Marcy what happened. I still haven't told anyone, not really. But some nights, I wake up to the faint ring of a phone that isn't in my house. Sometimes I dream I pick it up, and my father's voice is waiting on the other end, whispering that name in the same gentle tone, like he's only been waiting for me to come home. And the worst part is, when I wake up, I find myself wishing I'd stayed on the line just a little longer. The night was cold in that peculiar way the high plains could summon, the kind of chill that felt like it came not from the air, but from the land itself, rising up through the prairie grass and into your bones. I had been driving Highway 84 for years, hauling freight from Fort Worth up toward Clovis, and Lubbock was always my stop for gas and coffee when the midnight hours started pressing too heavy on my eyelids. That stretch of highway is a lonely one, straight lines of asphalt slicing through cotton fields and flat earth that look the same in every direction. On moonlit nights, the land itself seems hollow, as if all the weight of hills and trees has been carved away, leaving nothing but a flat stage for strange things to happen. And strange things did happen out there, though I used to laugh them off as trucker tales, stories passed between men in greasy caps at counter stools, trying to outdo each other with tales of shadow men or women in white thumbing rides they never finished. The first time I saw it was a Tuesday night in late September. I remember because the cotton harvest had just started, and I'd driven past a gin-spewing pale lint into the air like snow. The rest stop was one of those old, almost forgotten ones on the side of the highway, with cracked concrete picnic tables, a vending machine that hadn't worked in a decade, and restrooms that smelled faintly of mildew no matter how recently they'd been cleaned. I pulled in around 2 in the morning, the moon fat and yellow over the flat horizon. Mine was the only rig there, and I parked it along the edge so I could keep an eye on the place while I walked toward the restroom. It's a habit with truckers. You don't trust the silence of empty rest stops. They can turn on you quick. I'd Just finished washing my hands when I heard the sound. At first it was subtle, like wet fabric dragging against tile. Then came a scraping, deliberate and heavy, as if something was trying to pull itself along the floor. I thought maybe some drunk had passed out in the women's restroom and was trying to crawl out, so I stepped back outside. The night air hit me, sharp and dry, carrying with it that endless silence broken only by the buzzing of a sodium light that flickered near the entrance. I walked a little closer to the women's side, not sure if I should call out, when I saw the shadow fall across the cracked concrete. It was blacker than shadow should be, dense like it had weight. It stretched long and wrong, not quite matching the angle of the moonlight. And then the shape came crawling out. I swear to God, I still don't have words that make sense for what it looked like. It wasn't a person, though the form mimicked one, all elbows and knees pulling itself forward with jerking movements. It had no skin, no clothes, just black slickness that shone under the moon. The sound was awful. The slap of wet flesh on concrete, the drag of something raw against the earth. My throat locked tight. I couldn't even call out. The thing reached the edge of the concrete pad and slid onto the prairie grass. It moved, fast once it touched the dirt, almost eager, pulling itself through the tall grass until it was half hidden. I expected it to keep going, to vanish into the fields, but instead, it stopped. It rose slightly, arching its back, and for one unbearable second I thought I saw its head turn toward me, though there were no eyes, no mouth, nothing that resembled a face, just that raw blackness gleaming in the moonlight. Then, as I watched, it began to dissolve. Not vanish quick like a trick of light, but slowly, like smoke curling away from a dying fire. Pieces of it lifted into the air, thin strands pulled upward by some invisible hand, until there was nothing left but grass bending in the wind and the hollow hiss of the highway behind me. I didn't use that restroom again. I jumped back into my cab, slammed the lock, and sat there until the sun came up, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I tried to convince myself I'd been overtired, maybe dreaming on my feet. Truckers tell themselves things like that so they can keep driving. But I knew what I saw, and when I mentioned it to another driver at a truck stop cafe a week later, he didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, the crawling shape. You're not the only one." The stories came out after that, in fragments between bites of pie and sips of coffee. Some said it was the ghost of a woman who'd been attacked at that rest stop years ago, left for dead in the prairie grass, skin flayed by the man who took her. Others swore it was older, something from the land itself, a spirit that took form from pain and darkness and fed on the fear of those who happened by. Truckers aren't poets, but you could hear the tremble in their voices when they spoke of it, the way they refused to stop at that restroom after midnight, the way some swore they'd heard it crawling under their rigs, scratching at the metal like it wanted to climb inside. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it until last winter, when I passed through Lubbock again. It was bitter cold, the kind of night where frost clings to the edges of your mirrors. I didn't mean to stop at that rest area, but my stomach had turned sour and I couldn't keep driving. The place looked the same, though the lights buzzed weaker and graffiti covered the restroom walls. I stood at the urinal with my heart pounding in my ears, half expecting that dragging sound to start again. And it did. Louder this time. Closer. I froze. My breath came out in white plumes, and when I turned, I saw the door to the women's restroom push open, though no one touched it. The thing slid out again, same as before, black and skinless, pulling itself inch by inch toward the grass. But this time it didn't dissolve. It stopped at the edge of the concrete and lifted itself higher like it was testing the air. The moonlight caught on its wet form, and for a second I thought I saw the impression of features. Holes where eyes should be, a mouth stretched too wide, as if it were trying to remember what it once was. And then it whispered. I didn't hear words exactly, more like breath drawn across broken glass, a rasp that filled my head and made bile rise in my throat. My legs moved before my mind caught up, and I was sprinting to my truck, fumbling the keys, trying to convince myself it hadn't followed. When I looked in the side mirror, the prairie grass was still, but I swear the shadow beneath the sodium light stretched further than it should have, as if something still lingered there waiting. I don't stop at rest areas anymore. Not in Texas. Not anywhere. Because if the shape could crawl out of one restroom, what's to say it can't crawl out of another, pulling itself closer each time? Learning to stand, learning to follow. The highway feels different at night now. The silence is heavier, the moonlight sharper. And sometimes when the road dips low and the fields press close, I hear the faintest drag of something slick and heavy just beyond the reach of my headlights, keeping pace with me in the dark. The interstate through Sonora always felt different to me. I drove that stretch of I-10 plenty of times on business, hauling myself from San Antonio toward El Paso. But there's something about that land that never seems right. The limestone, hills rise and fall in strange shapes, mottled with mesquite and live oak, like bones pushing through the earth. The air in summer is brutal, thick with heat that makes the horizon ripple like it's alive. When I think about what happened to me out there, I can still taste the dust in my mouth and feel the sweat sticking my shirt to my back. And I can still see that child. It was mid-August when I pulled into the rest stop near Sonora. You know, the one? Just a long strip of cracked asphalt with a couple of picnic tables under tin shelters, a bathroom that stinks of bleach and piss, and a vending machine that eats your quarters. I'd been driving nearly 6 hours already and needed to stretch my legs. The sun was dropping lower, but it was still blazing hot, somewhere around 102 degrees if the truck's dash thermometer was telling the truth. The cicadas were loud, the kind of noise that gets under your skin, rising and falling in waves. A few cars were parked there, families letting their kids run around for a moment. It was ordinary, the kind of scene you forget 5 minutes later. At least it should have been. I noticed him standing by the far picnic table, half in the shade, half in the raw sun. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Skinny legs, pale knees, wearing shorts that looked a little too short. The kind kids wore back in the 90s. Not now. His t-shirt was plain white, dirt smudged around the collar. His hair was light brown, cut in a bowl shape that looked dated. He stood very still, too still for a child, and he was looking right at me. When our eyes met, he lifted his hand, in a strange, stiff sort of wave, not playful, almost rehearsed. I glanced around for parents. Nothing. A couple of women near the restrooms, 2 men smoking by their trucks, but nobody looking in his direction. I stepped out of my cab, and the heat hit me like a wall, sucking the breath out of me. That's when I noticed it. My breath fogged. Thick, heavy vapor like I'd stepped into a freezer, in August, in Sonora. I stopped mid-stride. The boy tilted his head like he was confused why I hadn't come closer. He lifted his hand again, beckoning this time. My chest tightened. Every instinct told me to get back in the truck, shut the yard door, and drive away. But there was something about his face. He didn't look menacing. He looked desperate. Like he'd been waiting a long time. I forced my legs to move, crunching over gravel toward him. With each step, the air got colder. My arms prickled with goose flesh. I could hear the cicadas still, but they sounded muffled, as if I were hearing them through glass. I was 10 feet away when he finally spoke. "Please," he said softly. "I can't find my dad." His voice was thin, quivering, almost swallowed by the stillness. I opened my mouth, but I had to cough first. My throat felt raw, like breathing winter air. I glanced behind me at the other travelers, ready to call someone over, but they hadn't noticed anything. They went on with their smoking and talking, oblivious. Even though the boy was right there, none of them turned their heads. "Where did you see him last?" I asked. My own voice sounded strange, hushed, though I hadn't lowered it. The boy raised his hand and pointed toward the trees beyond the rest stop where the land dips down toward the river. His hand shook. I followed his finger but didn't see anyone. Just brush and dark shadows pooling between the mesquite. When I looked back, he was closer than before, though I hadn't seen him move. The sudden nearness made me jerk back. His eyes were pale gray, almost washed out, and his lips had a bluish tint. "Please," he whispered again. "It's so cold." My head throbbed. My breath puffed in heavy clouds. I backed away, slow at first, then faster until I reached the edge of the pavement. The boy didn't follow, but he was still staring, his arms hanging limp now, shoulders sagging as though he were tired. I turned, scanning the people nearby. Still, no one paid attention. I wanted to shout, to demand if they saw him, but I didn't. Something in me knew what the answer would be. I climbed back into my truck, slammed the door and started the engine. I sat there shaking, hands frozen to the steering wheel though the heater was blowing hard. When I forced myself to look out the window again, the boy was gone. Just an empty picnic table and heat shimmering in the air. I drove off, heart pounding, glancing in the mirrors every few seconds. It took 20 miles before the air in the cab felt normal again, before the breath stopped fogging. I told myself I'd been hallucinating from exhaustion and heat, that maybe the kid had been real, but I'd imagined the rest. It was easier than believing the alternative, but I couldn't forget the way my body felt, like I'd been standing in a walk-in freezer. And I couldn't forget his eyes. 2 months later, I was at a diner outside Junction, talking to a trucker I'd met a few times on the route. We swapped stories about breakdowns and bad weather, and then, half joking, I mentioned the boy. His face drained of color. He sat down, his coffee, and leaned in close. "You saw him too," he said. Not a question. I froze. "What do you mean?" He told me he'd stopped at the same rest area a year before, in August as well. Said he saw a little boy in shorts asking for help. Said when he tried to talk to him, his breath turned white and his chest ached like he'd been punched. He'd run back to his rig and lock the doors. The kid never followed. But when he drove off, he caught sight of him in the mirror, standing in the middle of the asphalt with his arms out, like he was begging for a ride. I wanted to laugh it off, but his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Some say a family froze to death back in the 70s, he said. Car broke down in a freak cold snap. The parents were found by the road. The boy wasn't. Not until spring. I didn't know what to say. Maybe it was just a legend truckers passed around to scare each other. Maybe he was feeding me the same line I'd given him. But the memory of that blue-lipped child was still raw, too sharp to dismiss. I've driven I-10 past Sonora many times since. I won't stop there anymore. Not at that rest stop, not for gas, not for anything. If I'm tired, I push through. If I'm hungry, I wait. I keep my eyes locked forward, hands clenched on the wheel, praying I won't see him on the side of the road. But sometimes when the night is long and the air conditioning is blasting, I catch a flicker in my mirrors. A pale figure by the picnic table standing too still, waving a hand that isn't meant for anyone who can help. And then, I feel the cold creep into my bones again, and I know I'll never outrun him. Rest Stop 137 on Highway 287 looks like 1,000 others across Texas if you pass it in daylight. A few vending machines, a couple of picnic tables, the restroom building painted that faded beige the state likes so much. Trucks rumble by, pickups pull in and out, and you'd never think twice about it. But in the dead hours when the highway goes quiet and the cicadas give way to that wide, hollow silence of the plains, the place changes. It feels peeled back somehow, like the normal. Skin of the world is missing and you can see what crawls beneath. That's what I felt the night I stopped there, and I've wished every day since that I had just kept driving. I was heading north on 287 from Fort Worth, coming back from a long-haul delivery and bone-tired. It was early March, cold enough that the mist from the cattle lots hung in the fields like smoke. I'd been fighting to stay awake, chewing sunflower seeds, radio low. But around 2 in the morning, I knew I couldn't push another 50 miles. When I saw the green reflective sign, Rest Area 137, I flicked on the turn signal. I'd stopped at plenty just like it before. I figured I'd take a leak, stretch my legs, maybe shut my eyes for 20 minutes before finishing the run. The lot was nearly empty. One 18-wheeler sat idling near the far end, cab dark, driver probably asleep in the berth. There was another vehicle too, an older Ford pickup, engine still running, driver's side door open like whoever was in a hurry. I remember noticing that right away because the dome light was on and the keys were hanging from the ignition. Something about it put a prickle on the back of my neck. Folks out here don't usually leave their trucks running with the door wide open, not unless they're in bad shape or spooked. I parked a few spaces down and told myself maybe the guy just needed to piss real bad. The building itself looked the same as always. A row of vending machines humming by the entrance. One of them flashing out of order across the cracked plastic. The sodium lights buzzed and made everything look sickly yellow. The air smelled like diesel and pine disinfectant. I glanced at the pickup again before heading inside. Still idling, breath of exhaust puffing from the tailpipe, driver nowhere, in sight. Inside the restroom, it was colder than outside, the kind of cold that didn't match the weather. My boots echoed off the tile. A fluorescent light over one stall flickered like it couldn't decide if it was alive or dead. I used the urinal, washed my hands, then lingered a second longer than I meant to, just listening. The silence pressed, in between the buzz of the lights. I realized I hadn't heard the bathroom door open once since I'd walked in, and I knew damn well the pickup outside meant someone had come through here not long ago. That's when I saw the camera. Mounted up in the corner by the sinks, red LED glowing. State troopers always tell folks these places are monitored after dark for safety, but I'd never actually noticed one working. I thought of the guy in the truck, how he must have walked in right before me, and how I hadn't seen or heard a soul. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, tired, more worried than I wanted to admit. I shook it off, went back out to the lot. Nothing had changed. The truck still idled, door still wide. The 18-wheeler still hummed down at the far end. My own rig sat where I left it, but the whole place felt wrong, like a stage set after the actors left. I thought about walking over to peek inside the pickup, maybe check the building again, but something heavy in my chest said no. Just leave. Just get in your own cab and go. I didn't listen. Curiosity has a way of twisting your gut until you make mistakes. I walked toward that pickup. The closer I got, the louder the engine seemed, coughing like an old man with a bad lung. I leaned down to look inside. Empty. Bench seat, worn cowboy hat tossed on the passenger side, a half-drunk bottle of Dr. Pepper rolling against the floor mat. No phone, no wallet, just empty. The keys rattled in the ignition, metal teeth shaking like they wanted out. I straightened up quick. That's when I noticed it. The mist. It had crept in from the fields, low and white, hugging the asphalt. I swear it hadn't been there when I pulled in, but now it curled around my boots, moved with a slowness that made my skin crawl. I looked back at the building and saw something. Just for a second. A shadow crossing behind the frosted glass window, near the entrance, tall and deliberate. My first thought was the missing driver. Relief washed over me until I remembered I'd been inside. There's no way anyone could have walked around without me hearing it. My chest tightened. I got back in my rig fast, slammed the door, locked it. The radio hissed static when I turned it on, no station coming through. The mist thickened, swallowing the edges of the lot. The truck next to me still idled, door yawning wide. I told myself to drive away, but my hands gripped the wheel and wouldn't turn it. Something about that place rooted me there, made me feel like moving would draw attention. And then it happened. The pickup shut off. 1 second the engine rattled. The next it was dead silent. The dome light flickered and went black. I sat frozen, staring. Out of the corner of my eye, movement at the restroom door. The handle pushed down. The door eased open. I couldn't see who or what came out because the mist thickened right then like a curtain dropping. All I heard was the sound of boots on concrete, slow, steady, getting closer. I don't remember making the choice. I just floored it. My rig roared, tires spitting gravel as I shot out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something. The mist parting, a shape standing by the truck, tall, shoulders bent wrong, head tilted like it was watching me leave. I didn't look twice. I just drove. When I stopped at a way station 30 miles north, I was shaking so bad the officer asked if I needed medical help. I told him no, just tired. He pointed to the news on a small TV in the corner, a report playing about a man gone, missing. Security footage from rest stop 137 showed him walking into the restroom at 2:13 a.m. and never coming out. His truck was found still running, door open, keys inside. Same Ford pickup I'd seen. Same night I'd been there. I didn't say a word, just signed the log, climbed back into my rig and kept driving. I've hauled up and down 287 100 times since, but I'll never stop at that rest area again. Doesn't matter how tired I am, how bad I need to piss. Some places along that highway belong to something else, something that waits in the quiet hours when the cameras are the only witnesses. And once it notices you, it doesn't forget. The piney woods stretch out like a sea of black timber and tangled underbrush, thick enough to swallow whole towns if you let your mind drift too far. That night, I was driving east out of Nacogdoches, headed toward the Louisiana line, the kind of route where the road gets narrow, the shoulders crumble into sandy soil and the trees lean in as if they're listening. I'd left too late after a long day of hauling equipment for my brother's construction outfit, and by the time I hit the rural stretch of highway, it was pushing midnight. The dashboard clock glowed 12:14. The air outside was wet with that pine sap humidity that clings to your skin, and my eyes felt heavy as the beams caught the mist rising in streaks across the asphalt. I'd been through that part of East Texas plenty of times, but fatigue has a way of making familiar roads feel foreign. The pine forest pressed against both sides, branches arching overhead to blot out most of the sky, and the silence out there is absolute. Even with the radio turned low to a scratchy country station, I felt it, that sense of being wrapped up, tight in something older than highways and headlights. When the rest area sign appeared, a blue rectangle with white lettering announcing a pull-off in 2 miles, it felt like a relief. I figured I'd stop, stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, then push through to the state line. The rest area was the kind that barely looked like a state investment. A cracked loop of asphalt, a scattering of battered picnic tables. Beneath a pavilion, one leaning brick bathroom building with flickering fluorescent light and the woods hemming in every direction. My headlights skimmed over the tall trunks, catching the pale glint of pine bark. The lot was empty except for an old pickup parked crooked at the far end, dust-coated and dark inside. Nobody in sight. I pulled in closer to the pavilion and killed the engine. That's when the quiet hit me harder. You don't notice how much sound a running truck makes until you cut it off. Suddenly, I could hear the buzzing of insects in the dark and something else. Something faint. At first, I thought it was the breeze working through the trees, but the air was still. Then, underneath it, I swore I heard my name. Not shouted. Not even spoken clearly. Whispered. Dragged out like a secret slipping between teeth. My name. Soft and stretched, coming from the line of pines beyond the tables. I froze, keys still in my hand, every hair along my arm standing on end. I told myself it was the wind, that I was bone-tired and letting the night play tricks. But then I heard it again, closer this time, and in a voice I recognized. A voice I hadn't heard in 3 years, not since my mother's funeral. It was her, clear as if she'd been standing a foot away. She used the same way she'd say it when she wanted my attention, gentle, not angry, not urgent, just calling me. I should have left right then, should have turned the key, spun gravel, and driven until dawn. But something about hearing her voice in that place, some mixture of longing and disbelief, made me get out instead. The air was damp and sweet with pine needles, the ground soft under my boots. I stood by the truck, staring into the tree line, telling myself over and over it wasn't real. The night pressed against my ears, heavy, until the whisper came again. My name threaded through the shadows, and I felt my legs carrying me forward before I'd even decided. The trees closed around me fast. Within a dozen steps, the parking lot lights were just aglow behind me. The forest floor was thick with needles muffling every footfall. The pines stretched up like endless poles, and between them, the dark seemed to ripple. The whisper drifted from one side to the other like it was moving ahead of me. My chest tightened and every instinct screamed to stop, but the sound of her voice kept tugging me deeper. I told myself maybe someone else was out there, playing a cruel trick. But who would be waiting in those woods after midnight? The thought sat wrong in my gut. Then I heard something else layered beneath the whispers. Breathing. Not my own. This was heavier, ragged, as though something big and unseen was pacing me. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pin it down, but all I saw were trees fading into the black. Then came the snap of a branch under weight, close enough to send panic rushing up my spine. I backed away, tripped over a root, and caught myself on a trunk. The bark cut my palm. The whisper came again, sharp now, almost scolding. But it wasn't just my mother's voice anymore. It was lower, distorted, stretched until the words barely held shape. I felt something shift in the dark, like the trees themselves leaned closer. I ran, crashing through the undergrowth, heart pounding, eyes locked on the dim glow of the parking lot ahead. The whispers rose into a chorus, not just my mother now, but others, voices I knew and voices I didn't, all of them hissing, my name in different tones, some desperate, some mocking. I burst into the open, gasping, the truck only yards away. Behind me, the voices cut off all at once, as if a hand had clamped down on every unseen mouth. The silence roared in my ears. The pickup at the far end of the lot was still there, but now I could see a figure inside, slumped against the wheel. I thought maybe someone had been waiting in it. Maybe they'd been the one whispering through some trick. I stumbled closer, but the smell hit me before I reached the door. Rot, thick and unmistakable. The driver was nothing but bones in a plaid shirt, hands still curled on the wheel. The windows were fogged with age from the inside. I staggered, back shaking, fumbling for my keys. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and didn't breathe right until I was halfway to the state line. Even then, I could swear I heard the faintest sound in the vents, a whisper riding the air, dragging my name out long and thin, fading only when the dawn broke behind me. I never stopped at a rest area in those woods again. And when I tell people what happened, they laugh, say the piney woods play tricks, that the mind fills silence with what it misses most. But I know the difference between longing and terror. I know the sound of my mother's voice, and I know what I heard in that place wasn't her, not really. Whatever lives out there waits for the tired, the grieving, the ones foolish enough to listen. On Highway 20 west of Midland, there's a stretch of rest stop that looks more like an afterthought than a place meant for tired drivers. A cracked asphalt lot, a single leaning light pole, and a bathroom building that smells like mildew even when the wind cuts sharp. Truckers use it for a smoke or a quick nap. Oilfield workers stop to relieve themselves before pushing another hour down the road. And sometimes travelers who don't know any better pull over thinking it's a safe spot to stretch their legs. That was me once, years back, and I'll never forget the thing I saw there. The thing locals whisper about when the nights get long and the dust storms roll in. They call it the black dog, and they say if it shows up in your headlights, your ride is about to end bloody. I was driving back from El Paso late one night, trying to make it home to Abilene without pulling into a motel. The road was empty except for the occasional 18-wheeler. The air was dry as bone. Radio kept fading in and out, and the horizon felt endless, like I was crossing an ocean of dirt. Around midnight, my eyes started to blur, so when I saw the glow of the rest stoplights ahead, I figured I'd pull over, splash some water on my face, maybe walk a bit to wake myself up. The lot was empty except for a lone pickup parked crooked, its back window busted out and the tailgate hanging open. I thought it looked abandoned, but I didn't dwell on it. I went inside the bathroom, washed up, and when I came back out, I noticed something moving near my bumper. At first, I thought it was a stray. Midland has plenty of half-wild dogs wandering the scrubland, lean things with ribs showing, but this one wasn't lean. It was thick-bodied, coal-black from nose to tail, and it stood so still in the glow of the flickering pole light that it didn't look like it was breathing. Its eyes caught the light wrong, burning red like tail lamps. I froze, hand still on the door handle. The dog's head tilted, and I swear I heard claws click against the pavement, though its paws never moved. A growl rolled out of it, low and steady, and then it just turned and walked off into the dark, vanishing like it had stepped behind an invisible curtain. The hair on my arms lifted, and I remember thinking, hell no, not out here. Not this late. I jumped in, slammed the lock, and started the car. I didn't get far. 10 miles past the rest stop, I felt a thump in the steering, and then the whole car lurched sideways. My front right tire blew out so violently it shredded the rim. I was lucky not to flip. Heart hammering, I wrestled the wheel, managed to drag the car to the shoulder. Out there, the land is flat as a skillet. No trees, just scrub brush and barbed wire fencing. No sound except the wind. I killed the engine, climbed out, and the silence pressed in hard. That's when I noticed tracks on the asphalt. Not paw prints like you'd expect, but deep black smudges, almost like scorch marks shaped vaguely like pads and claws. They started near the shredded tire and led off into the dark beyond the fence. My flashlight beam couldn't catch an end. To them, I changed the tire in record time, knuckles raw, eyes darting at every sound. At one point, I heard something breathing just beyond the beam of light, steady, slow, and bigger than a dog ought to sound. I didn't dare look too long. Got the spare on, shoved the tools back, and peeled out with gravel spitting. I didn't look back, but I swear in my rear view, the red dots of eyes followed me until I crested the next rise. By the time I made it, home, my nerves were shot and I told myself it had to be exhaustion, tricks of the night, just a stray and a bad tire. But weeks later, when I was in a Midland diner, I overheard two oil field hands talking. One asked the other if he'd ever seen the black dog. The guy went quiet, real serious, then said, "If it's at your bumper, you'd best pray. Tires don't blow for nothing." I joined their table, pretending casual, and asked what they meant. They told me story after story. A trucker swore. The dog ran alongside his rig for miles, keeping pace at 70, until his rear axle snapped clean in half. A woman saw it at the rest stop one night, same glowing eyes, and the next morning she wrapped her car around a pole when both her tires blew at once. Always the same, black dog appears, tires or wheels fail, accidents follow. Nobody ever caught it, nobody ever touched it. It doesn't bark, doesn't bite, just appears, watches, and then vanishes. The old-timer at the counter leaned in and said it wasn't no dog at all, but a spirit from the oil fields. Some soul burned alive back in the boom days. He said men used to die out there all the time, caught in fires or crushed under rigs, and their ghosts wandered the scrubland. He believed one had taken the form of a hound, a shadow beast tied to the highways, feeding off crashes. I tried to laugh it off, but deep down I knew what I'd seen. That growl had rolled through me, and those eyes weren't the eyes of anything alive. A year later, I drove that stretch again during the day and I passed the rest stop. The pickup was gone, lot empty, but the light pole was still flickering. On the far side of the lot, by the scrub brush, I noticed something black and shiny, half buried in the dirt. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled over to check. It was a strip of tire, ragged and torn, edges burned like it had melted. As I bent down, the air grew still and I heard claws click on asphalt behind me. My heart stopped cold. I spun around, but the lot was empty. Just the light buzzing overhead, just the empty highway stretching flat forever. When I looked back, down, the tire scrap was gone. I didn't linger. I drove off, knuckles white, and I swore to myself I'd never stop there again. But the black dog doesn't wait for you at the rest stop anymore. It shows up wherever it wants. My cousin saw it outside Odessa, padding behind his pickup, and 3 hours later he rolled his truck in a ditch after 2 blowouts. He swears he saw red eyes in the ditch water before he blacked out. A neighbor swears she saw it in her headlights, out by Monahan, standing dead center of the road, eyes glowing, body bigger than any mastiff. She braked hard, swerved, but when she looked in her mirror, nothing was there. She got home fine, but the next morning her tires were flat, all 4, sidewalls ripped open like claws had raked them. Folks say if the black dog marks you, it doesn't matter where you go. It'll take its pound of flesh one way or another. Now I drive that road with a prayer in my throat, and I don't stop for anything. If you're ever west of Midland past midnight and you see a coal-black shape slip into your headlights, don't fool yourself into thinking it's just a stray. Don't honk, don't follow, and don't pull over. Because when its eyes glow, red and the growl rumbles low, your tires are already lost and the black dog will follow until the road takes you down. The wrong rest stop off I-10 near San Antonio has a smell to it. Not the usual bleach and mildew stench, but something under it, like a copper tang that clings to the back of your throat. I didn't notice it right away. I just pulled off the highway on my way back from visiting my sister in Kerrville. It was late, almost midnight, and the traffic had thinned to nothing but the occasional set of headlights in the distance. I remember the night being hot even for Texas, thick with humidity, the kind that sticks your shirt to your back. The rest area looked empty except for one other car, a faded maroon sedan parked crooked under a buzzing floodlight. The driver's side door was cracked open, but no one was inside. I thought maybe someone had just gone in to use the bathroom like me. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered once and steadied, bathing everything in that pale blue-white glow that makes you look sick in the mirror. The tile was cracked in a few places, and one of the sinks had a yellow out-of-order sign taped across it. I set my purse down by the working sink, turned the faucet, and let the water run over my hands. It was cooler than I expected, almost cold. That's when I looked up. The reflection staring back at me was mine, of course. Same dark hair, same sweat-sticking strands to my face. But something about it was wrong in that half-second glance. I thought maybe it was just the bad lighting, the way the mirror was slightly warped. I bent closer and kept washing. My reflection bent with me, every move identical. I splashed my face, blinked water out of my eyes, and when I looked up again, my reflection was smiling. I wasn't. I froze, dripping, staring at the glass. My mouth was closed tight, but the reflection's lips were curled into this strange, deliberate grin, too wide, showing too many teeth. It held the smile as if it had been waiting for me to notice. My first thought was that I was overtired, seeing things after too long a drive. I lifted my hand slowly, like I was testing myself. The reflection lifted hers, but the grin never wavered. My chest went tight. I backed away, grabbed my purse without taking my eyes off the glass, and headed for the door. My footsteps echoed against the tile. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed at the sink, smiling. Even when I was halfway out the door, I turned once to check. My reflection was still there, leaning on the counter, grinning like it had no intention of leaving with me. The night air hit me hard, muggy and close. The lot was empty except for that maroon sedan. Its door was still open, no sign of anyone. I walked fast to my car, every hair on my arm standing up. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, cursed, snatched them up, and forced myself to glance at the bathroom building one last time. The window above the sinks was dark, too dark, like there was no light inside at all. But I had just been in there, under those buzzing fluorescents. I drove off too fast, tires spitting gravel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Each time I expected to see her face in the back seat, grinning. The next morning I told myself it had to be exhaustion, stress, bad lighting, maybe even a trick of the glass. But when I stopped for gas in Bourne, I went into the station bathroom, just to prove it to myself. Plain mirror, tired eyes, no grin. I almost laughed in relief. Until I noticed faintly, on the silver edge of the glass, a smudge that looked like fingertips dragged down hard. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, back in San Antonio, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror at home. My reflection blinked a half-second too late. Just once. And yesterday morning, while brushing my teeth, I swear my reflection didn't spit the toothpaste when I did. It just stood there, watching me with that same quiet, waiting smile. I haven't used a mirror since. But sometimes, in the dark of my bedroom, I can feel something standing just across from me, grinning in the places I can't see. Highway 83 cuts through the Rio Grande Valley like a scar, stretching straight and endless between flat farmland, weather-beaten towns, and the occasional lonely rest stop with its concrete picnic tables and rusted grills. People drive it every day, hauling produce, cattle, and sometimes just themselves. But down here, stories ride the road like shadows, whispered at diners and gas stations late at night. One of those stories is about the hitcher. Folks say if you're out past midnight, especially near the small pull-off stops with their half-dead mesquite trees, you might see an old man in faded denim sitting at the curb near the picnic area, elbows resting on his knees, head low like he's just tired of walking. Cameras along the rest stops have caught him before. Grainy images of a thin, weather-worn figure, white stubble on his chin, denim jacket even in the summer heat. He doesn't move much, just sits and waits. And they say every driver who's pulled over to offer him a ride never made it where they were going. I didn't believe the story until the summer of 2016. My cousin Daniel had just buried his father in Mercedes, and we were making the long drive back toward Laredo. It was close to 2 in the morning when Daniel, who was driving, spotted someone on the curb at a small rest stop just past La Jolla. I saw him too, clear as day in the glow of the headlights. An older man, thin as a rail, denim jacket, jeans, dusty boots sitting there like he'd been waiting all night. Daniel slowed down. I told him not to. Everyone in the valley has heard the story of the Highway 83 hitcher, but Daniel wasn't the superstitious type, and grief had a way of making him reckless. He pulled into the lot and rolled the window down. The man lifted his head, and the first thing I noticed was his eyes. They weren't cloudy like an old man's. They were sharp, black, and steady, watching us with the stillness of a predator. His mouth cracked into a dry smile. "Headin' west?" His voice was raspy but strong, the kind of voice that could cut through a storm. Daniel nodded. Without another word, the man got up and slid into the back seat. He smelled of earth and tobacco, but underneath was something else, something sour and damp like old river water. Daniel asked where he was headed. The man leaned forward, his hands resting on the back of our seats. His fingernails were long and yellow, and I swear they scratched the vinyl when he tapped. "Just down the road," he said. We pulled back, onto 83, the headlights carving through the dark. The road was empty except for us, the night heavy with that still heat that never really breaks in the valley. The hitcher didn't speak much, just sat there staring out the window as if the night held something for him. Daniel tried small talk, asking if he was from around there. The man chuckled low, a dry, rasping sound that didn't match the humor in his words. "Been here longer than you can imagine." I didn't like the way he said it, like it wasn't just about years but centuries, like he was tied to the soil itself. After about 15 minutes, Daniel noticed we hadn't passed a single sign, gas station, or set of headlights. It was as if the road had stretched itself out longer than it should be, swallowing time. He asked the man again where to drop him. The hitcher leaned forward until his face was between us. His skin was tight against his bones, his lips stretched, in that same dry smile. "Don't worry, we're almost there." His breath was cold, though the night was 90 degrees and it spilled across my neck like a winter draft. The car shuddered. Daniel cursed, thinking it was the transmission. But the engine was fine, the gauges normal. What wasn't normal was the way the air seemed to thicken inside the car, heavy and damp like we'd driven into a storm cloud. The windows fogged up from the inside, streaks running down the glass though the AC was still blasting. I wiped at mine with my sleeve, and for a second I thought I saw something moving alongside us out in the dark fields. Shapes like figures keeping pace with the car, gray and gaunt. But when I looked again, the night was empty. The hitcher laughed. It was soft at first, then louder, echoing inside the car like there were more than one of him. Daniel gripped the wheel tight, his knuckles pale. "All right, man, this is as far as we're taking you. Get out." The car was still moving, but Daniel was aiming for the shoulder. That's when the hitcher leaned close to his ear and whispered something I couldn't hear. Daniel's eyes went wide, and he slammed on the brakes. We skidded to a stop, tires screaming on the asphalt. I turned to see what the man had said, but the back seat was empty, just empty like he'd never been there. The only thing left was the smell of damp earth, and in the dim dome light I saw streaks on the seat where his hands had been. Long, wet stains like water seeping up through the fabric. Daniel was shaking. He put the car back in gear and drove, faster this time, refusing to look in the mirrors. I wanted to tell him to slow down, but something in me knew it wouldn't matter. The road had changed. No matter how far we drove, it was just the same stretch of highway repeating itself. Same mesquite trees, same fence posts leaning into the dark. My phone had no signal, no clock, no glow, just black. We were alone on that road with no way out. Then, maybe an hour later, though it felt longer, we saw a sign for Zapata. Relief surged through me, but Daniel just muttered that he didn't trust it. He kept driving until the lights of a truck stop appeared. We pulled in, and as soon as we did, everything snapped back. My phone lit up with messages, the dashboard clock blinked 3:17 a.m., and there were other cars, other people, the hum of normal life. It was like we'd driven through some pocket of time and finally broken free. Daniel parked, put his head on the wheel, and cried. He never told me what the hitcher whispered to him that night. He swore he never would. All I know is Daniel wasn't the same after. He stopped driving alone. Sometimes he'd wake in the night and call me asking if I could hear something outside, like someone whispering his name. 6 months later, he drove out to see his mother in Mercedes and never arrived. They found his car on the side of Highway 83, driver's door open, keys still inside, engine idling. Just like the others. And me, I don't drive 83 at night anymore. Because I know the hitcher is still out there, sitting on the curb in his faded denim waiting for the next driver to stop. And if you do, you'll never make it where you're going. Highway 71 runs quiet through the pines east of Bastrop, and I've driven it more times than I can count, usually at night, usually with nothing but black trees pressing on both sides of the road. It's a place where the headlights feel swallowed, after 20 feet, where every pull-off and gravel shoulder looks the same. Folks who live around here don't linger at the picnic areas after dark, and if you ask why, they'll give you a dozen different answers, but they all circle back to the same story, the knocking. Some swear it's teenagers pulling pranks, others blame stray branches or wind. But families who've stopped will tell you the sound is steady, measured, like a hand rapping politely on glass. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. And when they check, there's never anyone there. I didn't believe it myself until last summer when I drove my sister and her kids back from Austin after a late birthday dinner. We hit that stretch near Bastrop around midnight, and the little one, Emma, needed the restroom. Against my better judgment, I pulled into one of those small roadside rest areas, the kind with a single flickering light above the bathroom doors and a cracked vending machine humming against the brick wall. The air smelled like sap and wet dirt, and it was hotter than hell even at that hour. The kind of heavy heat that clings to you. I told my sister to take Emma inside and left the engine running with the air conditioning blowing for her older boy, Mark, who was already nodding off in the back seat. I sat in the driver's seat scrolling absently through the radio stations when it came. Knock, knock, knock. It was so deliberate that at first I thought my sister was back, maybe without her keys. I glanced at the passenger window. No one. Just the glow of the security light casting long shadows across the picnic tables. Then it came again, right against the glass at my elbow. Knock, knock, knock. My stomach flipped. I rolled the window down halfway, half expecting to catch a branch swaying, but the nearest tree was 10 feet away and still as stone. The air outside smelled different, sharp, almost metallic, like when you bite your tongue. The hair on my arms prickled. Behind me, Mark started giggling. At first it was soft, like he was laughing at a dream, but then it rose sharp and loud, the kind of laughter that doesn't sound like a kid's joy at all. I twisted around in my seat and asked him what was so funny. His face was pale in the dashboard glow, his eyes fixed on something past my shoulder. "She's making faces," he whispered. My heart dropped. There was no one outside. The knocking came again, closer this time, not on the glass, but against the rear door, right where Mark sat. He burst into hysterical laughter, the kind that teeters on the edge of crying. I threw the car in park, scrambled out, and yanked open the rear door. Nothing, just the hot night pressing in and the faint chirp of crickets. Mark stared through me, still laughing, his small hands clutching his seatbelt like he couldn't let go. I told him to cut it out, to stop scaring me, but he only shook his head. "She's still there," he said, voice trembling through the laughter. My sister came back then carrying Emma, who was half asleep on her shoulder. She saw my face and asked what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. I slammed the doors, locked them, and pulled out of that rest area so fast gravel spit behind us. For the first few miles, nobody spoke. Then Emma stirred in her booster seat and started to giggle too, the same brittle laugh her brother had. "She's waving," she said, her eyes fixed on the black window beside her. I kept my eyes dead ahead, knuckles white on the wheel, and drove until the pines thinned and the lights of Bastrop bled through the windshield. By the time we hit town, both kids had slumped into uneasy sleep, but I swear I could still hear the rhythm of those knocks in my head, steady as a heartbeat. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night for weeks, not until I mentioned it to a neighbor over beers. He went pale and said his cousin had pulled over in the same stretch years back, same knocking on the glass, same kids laughing at something outside. Only difference was when his cousin got home, his youngest swore she had a new friend who followed them. For weeks she talked to someone invisible, always at night, always by the window. Then one morning she woke up with scratches down her arms, thin and parallel, like fingers pressed too hard. They moved not long after. Every time I have to drive that highway now, I roll the windows up tight and keep my eyes forward. The woods blur by in a tunnel of black and I refuse to stop no matter what. Because sometimes, even over the engine and the tires humming on asphalt, I swear I hear it again. Knock, knock, knock. And I know if I ever look over, I might see a face smiling back through the glass, one my kids would recognize before I ever did. The first time I stopped at that rest area off I-40 west of Amarillo, I thought the smell was just the pipes. You know how those old roadside bathrooms get, like sour mop water and mildew that's been soaking in the walls for years. But the second I pushed that door open, it hit me in the face like a blast of heat from an oven, sulfur and rot, thick enough to taste. It made the back of my throat seize up. I gagged hard, hand over my mouth, and the only reason I didn't turn right back around was because I'd been holding it for 50 miles. The men's side was empty, hollow concrete echoing under the hum of a flickering fluorescent light. The stink got worse as I walked further in, and under the smell of sulfur, there was something sharper, like hot metal. The urinals were stained orange, the stalls streaked with things I didn't want to look at too close, and the graffiti scratched into the metal doors looked less like teenage scribbles and more like words etched deep, letters carved with pressure and anger. Some of them weren't even English, or at least not letters I recognized. I remember standing at the sink, washing my hands fast because I wanted out of there, and the water came out rust red for the first second before running clear. The mirror was cracked in 3 long jagged lines, and when I bent close, my nose started bleeding out of nowhere. Just one heavy drip, then another, and before I knew it, both nostrils were streaming. It came fast, too much, like I'd been punched in the face. I cupped my hands under it, horrified, blood mixing with rusty water, and I couldn't get it to stop. My head throbbed, ears ringing, and all the while the stink of sulfur thickened until I swore it was alive, pressing into my skin, sinking into my clothes. I staggered out of there half blind, blood soaking through a napkin I'd grabbed from my truck, and sat in the driver's seat until the bleeding slowed. It lasted almost an hour before it stopped completely. I told myself it was just dry air, the high plains getting to me, maybe something in the pipes stirring up old fumes. I didn't want to think about how the words carved into the stall head looked like they'd been burned in rather than scratched. 2 weeks later, I drove through again on my way back east. I swore I wouldn't stop, but the coffee I'd been pounding caught up with me. The sky was low, gray-yellow dust kicking across the asphalt, wind howling over the flat nothing. The whole rest area looked abandoned, no cars, just my truck and a line of stunted mesquite trembling in the hot wind. I told myself I'd be quick. The second I opened the door, the stink was there, stronger than before. Sulfur, rot, scorched, hair. The light inside was out, but the sun through the grime-streaked windows gave enough to see the dark smears across the tile. Not dirt, not rust. I stepped carefully, heartbeat in my ears, and the smell shifted, sour and sharp, like something freshly dead left too long in the sun. I held my breath, but it burned my sinuses anyway, as if the stink had weight. I almost turned back, but then I heard something. Not loud, not clear, just a soft drip, steady, from the last stall. I froze. The air was so heavy it felt like standing in a mine shaft, underground, no air moving. Another drip, and then a slow, dragging sound, like a wet rag pulled across concrete. I whispered hello without thinking, my voice sounding too loud. No answer, just that dragging sound, closer now, steady as breathing. My nose began to tingle, and in the next second blood started flowing again, sudden and hot. It ran down over my lips, and the smell of iron mixed with the sulfur until I gagged. I stumbled backward, hit the sink with my hip, and when I looked up, I swear there was something in the mirror. Not me, not exactly. My reflection's mouth was open wide, gaping, but my own lips were clamped tight. Its eyes were darker, like sockets full of smoke. I jerked back, turned for the door, and ran. The dragging stopped the second I hit sunlight, but the nosebleed didn't quit until I'd driven halfway to Shamrock. Later, talking to a trucker at a diner, I mentioned the place without meaning to. He just looked at me like I'd said something dirty. "Don't stop there," he muttered. "Not unless you want it following you." I pressed him, but he just shook his head and ordered another coffee. Following me. The word stuck with me the whole drive, and maybe they still do. I can smell it sometimes, faint and sharp, even when I'm nowhere near Amarillo. I'll be shaving in the morning. Look down at the sink, and there'll be a thin red drop spreading in the porcelain. My nose starting to bleed again for no reason. Once I woke up in the night and the room smelled like burning sulfur. I searched the house, nothing there, windows shut, vents clean. But in the mirror above the bathroom sink, the crack that had never been there before ran from corner to corner. 3 jagged lines, and for just a second I thought I saw smoke curling on the other side of the glass. Some places rot from the inside out, and you can smell it before you see it. That rest stop west of Amarillo is one of them. If you're driving through, hold it until the next town. Whatever waits in there doesn't want you to leave clean, it wants you bleeding. Highway 222 cuts through Texas like a long scar. Straight stretches of asphalt broken by little more than scrubland, fences, and the occasional lonely rest stop. There's a kind of emptiness out there that doesn't feel natural, like the land has swallowed up too much history and never let it go. I was headed west one night, running late from visiting a friend in Abilene, when I pulled into rest stop 222. The gas gauge on my truck had dipped low and my eyes were heavy, that kind of bone-deep tired that makes you start to second-guess whether you've already passed the same mile marker twice. The place was lit by a handful of tall lamps that hummed against the dark, their glow pooling yellow onto cracked pavement. A couple of vending machines stood by the bathroom building, their glass fronts lit up with candy bars and sodas. That's when I saw him. He was standing still, right in front of the vending machines. Tall, easily 6.5 feet, maybe more. Broad shoulders, a long coat that brushed his boots, and a cowboy hat pulled low so I couldn't see much of his face, just shadow where his eyes should have been. He wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight, just fixed in place like someone had rooted him there. I figured maybe he was waiting for someone or just out stretching his legs. But the air around him didn't feel right. There was no casual presence in the way he stood. He was stiff, like a mannequin, except I knew he wasn't. Something in me clocked him as alive, though silent as the grave. I didn't want to stare. I parked a couple of spaces over and killed the engine, the sound of it dying out making the night feel even larger. My headlights clicked off, and for a second I felt exposed, like I'd cut the one tether keeping me connected to normalcy. The hum of the lamps was loud, and beyond that, the endless Texas dark. He didn't look at me, but I knew he knew I was there. Every hair on my arm stood up as I grabbed a couple of quarters from the cup holder, convincing myself I was only stopping for a Coke to keep awake. Just normal road trip business, nothing to it. When I got out, the gravel crunched under my boots. The sound carried too far, and I hated how loud it seemed. The man didn't turn, didn't react. He kept his hands at his sides. His silence pressed into me, heavier with each step. I wanted to tell myself he was just some local, maybe a rancher who'd pulled off for a break. But who just stands there, not moving, at 2 in the morning by a vending machine. I got close enough to smell the faint tang of dust and something else, metallic like rusted iron. I fed quarters into the machine, trying not to glance over. I could see the brim of his hat in the edge of my vision, could feel the weight of him just standing there. When the coke dropped with a clatter, I jumped harder than I care to admit. The sound rang out too sharp in the emptiness, like a gunshot. Still, he didn't flinch. He didn't breathe. I started to wonder if he really was alive, though I could swear I'd seen the faintest movement earlier. A twitch in the hand, a tilt of the head. I never heard a breath. I turned, can in hand, and gave him a polite nod, the kind you'd give anyone in passing just to say, "I see you, you see me," nothing more to it. His head tilted slightly in return, slow, unnatural, like the hinge of a rusted door being forced. That was all. No words, no shuffle of boots. Just that slight acknowledgement. I walked back to my truck without looking back. The coke felt like a dead weight in my hand. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My headlights swept over him, but in the white glare I realized something was wrong. His shadow was gone. The vending machines threw long, clean shadows across the pavement. But where he stood, there should have been a figure. There wasn't. Just light. Just empty space. Though I knew he was still there, still staring at me. I slammed the gear shift into drive and rolled out of that place faster than I should have. Gravel popping under the tires as I merged back onto the empty stretch of highway. The strangest part came later. A few weeks afterward, I mentioned it to a buddy of mine who drives rigs out west. I thought he'd laugh, tell me I'd been half asleep and spooked myself for nothing. But he went pale, real pale, and asked me, "Was that off 222? The rest stop with the broken lamppost near the bathroom?" When I nodded, he just muttered, "You saw him too." He told me about the silent man. That's what truckers call him. Tall, hat brim low, never speaks. Folks say if you stare too long at him, he follows you. Not on foot, not in any way you can see. But he gets inside, into your head. Drivers report waking up to see him standing at the end of their motel bed, or catching him in the reflection of their truck mirror when the road's empty, always silent, always watching, and by morning gone. Some say he's tied to that land, maybe a remnant of something violent that happened there years back. Others say he's no man at all, just some shape that borrowed the outline of one. Tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. For nights after, I dreamed of that brim lowering the way his head tilted toward me. In one dream, I stood by the vending machines again, and this time he did move. He leaned close, so close I could feel the brush of dry air against my ear, and though he made no sound, I heard him in my skull, like words pressed straight into bone. I woke up bleeding from the nose, the taste of iron thick in my mouth. I told myself it was coincidence, a random nosebleed. Nothing to do with him. But even now, whenever I drive that stretch, I refuse to stop at 222. I pass by with my eyes fixed on the horizon, praying I never see that tall shape standing there, again waiting, because I know if I do, he won't just stay by the machines this time, he'll come closer. He's been waiting for me to look back. I used to think the only thing you had to worry about on I-35 at night was fatigue. Maybe a drunk driver weaving in from the feeder road, or the occasional deer bolting across the asphalt. I'd been hauling loads up and down that stretch for nearly 15 years from San Antonio to Dallas, and I knew every rest area, every loves, every pothole between New Braunfels and Hillsborough. But Waco, that curve of highway just before the Brazos River bridges, had a reputation among the old hands. They'd joke about it on the CB, half serious, half testing the rookies. Talk about the ghost convoy, engines rumbling where no trucks were. The thunder of air brakes in the dark. Parked rigs rocking like something had just shot past, even when the road outside was clear as a Sunday morning church lot. I never gave it much thought until the night my reefer broke down near midnight, just north of Waco. My dispatcher told me to wait for roadside service, but I figured I'd limp into the next rest stop to keep out of traffic. I pulled in, parked between two long haulers, and killed the engine. The air was still thick with August heat, cicadas sawing away in the trees beyond the lot. My cab felt like an oven, so I opened the vent windows and leaned back in the seat, waiting on the mechanic. That's when I noticed the first vibration. At first I thought it was a truck rolling past out on the highway, but when I looked, the lanes were empty. The vibration didn't fade like it should have. It grew stronger, rattling my dash, making the CB mic swing on its cord. The rig shook like a jet had just buzzed by. I sat up, heart thumping, eyes scanning the mirrors. Nothing. The two trucks parked beside me rocked too, their trailers quivering on their springs as if some invisible gust had blasted through the row. Then it stopped. Dead still again, like the night was holding its breath. I opened the door and climbed down, gravel crunching under my boots. The air smelled faintly of diesel and warm tar, the usual. A lone sodium lamp hummed overhead, casting everything in that jaundiced glow. I walked around my rig, laid a hand on the trailer. Warm metal, still vibrating just a little, like it had memory of what had passed. The trucker to my left cracked his curtain and peered out. He was an older guy with a gray beard and a baseball cap. He gave me a nod like, "Yeah, you felt it too." Then he shut the curtain without a word. I tried to shake it off, telling myself maybe a big rig had blasted by without lights, maybe running illegal and trying to stay hidden. But the rationalization didn't stick. The next hour proved it. The shaking came again, stronger. This time, the lights of the lot flickered, like a massive load had just rolled through the grid. My truck leaned hard, suspension squealing. I swore I heard the roar of diesel engines, a whole line of them barreling past, air horns blaring faint like they were underwater. I stumbled back, staring at the highway, still empty. No headlights, no taillights stretching out for miles. When the vibration quit, the night filled with silence again, thicker than before. Then I heard it, CB static. My radio wasn't even on. The mic hissed, then crackled, then a voice broke through. Faint, garbled, something like southbound, keep formation, 30 miles. Then another voice layered on, low and broken. "You missed the exit, you missed the exit." I snatched the mic, but the moment my hand touched it, the radio went dead. Cold silence. The mechanic never showed. Maybe he did. Maybe he turned around when he pulled in and saw something he couldn't explain. I sat there the rest of the night, half dozing, half alert, every muscle wired tight. At one point I woke to the sound of chains rattling like loose tie-downs slapping in the wind. I looked out and swore I saw headlights reflecting off chrome, dozens of them, lined up in the lot, rows of trucks that hadn't been there before. But the second I blinked, the lot was empty again. Just me and the gray-bearded guy's rig and one other Peterbilt humming with its APU. Morning came slow, with a pale blue haze creeping across the sky. By then I'd convinced myself I'd been half dreaming, maybe dehydrated, maybe cooked too long in the cab heat. I fired up my truck, everything working like nothing had happened, reefer humming steady again. Before I pulled out, the gray-bearded trucker stepped down from his cab and walked over. He didn't say howdy, didn't ask where I was headed. He just looked me dead in the eye and said, "They run this stretch every August. Convoy that never made it through. Best you don't. Park here after dark." I laughed it off, but it was the kind of laugh that falls flat. More for yourself than for anyone else. He didn't laugh with me. He just climbed back in his rig and shut the door. I drove off southbound, gripping the wheel tighter than I should have, watching the mirrors as though something might come barreling up behind me. Nothing did. The sun burned away the haze, the road stretched wide open. Still, I didn't stop again until San Antonio. I told myself I wouldn't think about it anymore, that it was just truck stop talk made real by a tired mind. But 2 weeks later, on another night run, I passed the same stretch. My CB lit up on its own, no power on, no green glow, just static and that same voice, hollow, far away. "You missed the exit." I don't drive nights anymore, not on I-35, not anywhere near Waco. The old rest stop off Highway 77 had been closed for years. boarded up when the state rerouted traffic closer to Corpus Christi, but truckers still pulled in sometimes. The asphalt was cracked, weeds split through it, and the only light came from a leaning lamppost that hummed and flickered when the wind pushed against the wires. I only stopped there because my stomach had been in knots since Refugio, and the gas station I tried earlier had locked its bathrooms for the night. It was past midnight, late summer, still humid enough to stick my shirt to my back, and I told myself a quick stop would be fine. No one would care if I slipped into a bathroom that hadn't been officially open in a decade. The men's room door was warped, swollen from years of moisture, and I had to push my shoulder into it to get inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, sour and damp like wet concrete left to mold. My phone's flashlight painted everything in washed-out yellow, the cracked tiles, the old sinks lined in rust, the urinals clogged with dead leaves. There was graffiti on the walls, but most of it was faded into gray smears. For a second I thought about just walking back out, holding it until the next town, but the pressure in my gut wouldn't let me. I moved toward the stalls. As I passed the sinks, one of the faucets coughed and sputtered, and water trickled out. That stopped me cold. There hadn't been power in this place for years. No utilities, nothing. The pipes should have been bone dry. I aimed my light at it and saw the water wasn't clear. It came out dark like weak coffee, and then for maybe 3 seconds it turned red. It wasn't bright like paint either, but thick and dull. The color of old blood washed down with water. I told myself rust, some mineral buildup, nothing more. But my throat went tight anyway. Then I heard it. Faint, almost under the noise of the dripping, wailing. Like the sound carried through the pipes, too low for words, too cracked for a voice, but enough to raise the hair on my arms. I froze, listening. The air felt heavier, damper, as if someone had turned down the temperature in just that corner. The faucet shut itself off with a dry squeal of metal, and the wailing stopped with it. The silence after was worse. I told myself to move, to finish my business and get out before I spooked myself too badly. But my legs didn't want to carry me forward. I ended up in the stall closest to the door, keeping the latch unlocked just in case. The whole time, my ears strained for the sound again. I finished quick, not even sitting, and when I flushed, the pipes rattled. That was when the noise came back, stronger, not faint anymore, as if the act of using the water had pulled it up, wailing, but closer, sharp enough that I could hear breaks in the voice like sobs. It echoed against the tiles, making it impossible to tell where it started, but it seemed to crawl out from the sinks. My chest went cold and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The stall door creaked, though I hadn't touched it. It swung an inch open, then stopped. I pushed it shut hard, fingers clenching the lock, even though I knew the lock wasn't much more than a rusted hook. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but there hadn't been a draft in there, not even a whisper of moving air. Then came another sound. The sinks all turned on at once, water gushing like someone had opened every valve. My flashlight beam bounced on the tiled wall, catching sprays of water that ran red again. The smell changed too, sharp iron cutting through the mold, a scent that made bile crawl up my throat. The wailing rose over the rush of water, turning into screaming. Not just one voice, many tangled together, echoing out of the drains, the pipes, even the walls themselves. High, low, men, women. It was impossible to tell. I stumbled out of the stall, forgetting everything except getting out. The sinks were overflowing, water running across the floor, and it was red as it reached my boots. It spread thick, leaving streaks behind on the cracked tiles. I thought about stepping straight over it, but when I did, my light caught something in the water. A handprint smeared across the floor, like someone had pressed down into the liquid and dragged their palm. The screaming cut off. All of it. Dead silence except for the drip of water hitting the floor. I didn't breathe for what felt like a full minute, waiting for it to start again. Then I heard something new. Gurgling. From the nearest sink. My flashlight shook in my hand, but I forced it down. The basin bulged, water lifting like it had pressure under it, then collapsed, sucking itself back into the drain with a wet choke. I swear I saw fingers in that swirl, pale ones, knuckled, gripping the porcelain before vanishing. The gurgle turned into a moan long and hollow before going silent again. I ran. Didn't wash my hands, didn't look back, just shoved out the warped door and into the sticky night. The parking lot looked different than when I'd gone in. Fog clung low to the ground, heavy enough to blur the broken lamplight. My truck sat by itself, too far away, and for a moment I thought I saw someone standing by it. Tall, still, facing the bathroom door. I couldn't make out details, just a darker shape in the fog. I blinked, and it was gone. My boots slapped wet asphalt as I sprinted, not stopping until I had slammed the driver's door shut and locked it. My chest heaved, sweat soaking the back of my shirt, but all I could smell was iron. The same scent that had filled the bathroom. It clung to my skin. I started the engine and threw it into gear, gravel spraying behind me. In the mirror, the fog clung to the building, wrapping around it like a living thing. For a second, I thought I saw the bathroom lights on, pale and flickering, but I didn't slow to check. I drove until I hit the lights of Corpus Christi, past empty stretches of highway, and didn't pull over again that night. The smell stuck with me, though, soaked into my hands like it had gotten inside. My skin, no amount of washing since then has scrubbed it off completely. Sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I'll hear the pipes rattle. Just a little. Then a faint wailing, like water struggling through clogged drains. And when I turn the faucet, I watch the water carefully, waiting for it to run red. I was west of Fort Stockton when the wind came up the way it does out there, a steady push that rolls sand across the asphalt like low fog. It was past midnight, and the dash clock was ticking toward 1 when my eyes went blurry at the edges. I'd been driving since San Angelo on my way to El Paso with a crate of parts that would be obsolete in a month, and I needed a restroom and a stretch before I started seeing things that weren't there. The highway was empty in that hollow, way that makes you feel like the last living person. Just the hum of the tires and a moon so hard and white it looked chiseled out of bone. When I saw the blue sign for a rest area in 2 miles, I switched on my blinker out of habit, even though no one was behind me in 100 miles of dark. The rest stop sat low against a rise. A couple of concrete buildings sunk into the earth, like bunkers, the kind Texas builds to hide people from tornadoes and heat. The parking lot lights buzzed and threw a pale circle over bleached picnic tables and a patch of prickly pear behind chain link. The wind was pushing paper cups around and the night smelled like caliche and old diesel. I parked by the vending machines, killed the engine, and sat a second listening to the ticking of hot metal cooling. The windows were filmed with dust. The radio fizzed with stations that came and went like ghosts. I got out and locked the door. The wind tugged at my shirt and made my eyes water. It was cool for late summer, a gift you can get out there if fronts pushing through, and the stars went straight down to the horizon where a grain train crawled past with 2 engines and a string of open hoppers. There was a women's restroom on the left, men's on the right, and a little glass-walled room in between with brochures nobody took and a map of Texas like a giant broken plate. She was standing where the cement walkway makes that corner by the women's door, barefoot, a little girl, 10 at most, in a faded yellow dress that might have once had flowers. The dress was too light for the wind and it clung to her knees. Her feet were dirty like she'd been running in dust and somewhere along the way picked up stickers, and there was a smudge across one shin in the shape of a hand that got my attention more than anything. Her hair was long and tangled, and the kind of dark that turns purple under fluorescent light. She was looking at me with a smile that made my skin crawl so fast I felt the crawl, a hot wash up my arms to my neck. It wasn't because she was a kid alone at 1 in the morning, though that should have bothered me more than it did. It was the smile. You know how most smiles stop at the cheeks and pull your eyes along whether you like it or not. This one didn't stop where it should have. It went wide enough that I saw too many teeth, not in a sharp way, not fangs, nothing like that. Just more. Crowded, pale, stacked like shells in a drawer. "Hey there," I said, and I kept my voice level and light, because you learn to do that on the road when you run into strange situations. The wind pushed my words down the walkway. "You okay, kiddo? Where are your folks?" She didn't answer. The smile didn't change. It was polite, almost pretty if you looked from far enough away, and then wrong once you were close. I was close, 20 feet. I stopped because my legs did it for me. The light over the women's door flickered. The vending machines behind me made a sound like something shaking in a jar. The breeze flipped a brochure in the glass room and the paper. Rabbit punched the window. Flap, flap, flap like a slow heartbeat. I looked around for a car, an RV, anyone. There was a pickup with a cage trailer at the far end, door shut, bed full of netted junk. There were 2 semis sleeping nose to tail, their sleepers dark. The rest stop ranger's truck was nowhere I could see. A trail of footprints dotted the concrete near the girls' feet, only I couldn't tell if they were wet or dusty because they looked like both at once, like a place a puddle had dried through and left a rim of salt. "Are you lost?" I said. "Do you need help?" She said. "Ma'am is in there." The voice was small, not creepy, just small. It came out bent by the wind. The too wide smile didn't move while she said it. I don't know how to describe that in a way that doesn't make me sound like I'm changing my story. Her mouth was a smile and the words came out around it like the smile was something separate, like it had been painted on from the inside. "Your mom's in the restroom?" I said. She nodded without blinking. The hair stuck to her cheek where there had been tears at some point that night and dried there, leaving little clean streaks through the dust. I took a breath through my mouth and my tongue tasted like pennies. Out there, that can mean anything and nothing. It hit me hard anyway. I realized I had been standing scarecrow still with the wind flattening my shirt against my chest. I put my hands out, palms open like you do with stray dogs. "All right," I said. "I'm just going to go see if she's okay. Do you want to wait here?" She nodded again. The smile deepened half an inch in both directions, as if giving me permission, moved, and the sound of my boots on the concrete seemed too clear, like it was being recorded. I pushed the women's restroom door with 2 knuckles, calling "Anybody in here, hello?" at the same time so nobody got the wrong idea. The door pushed back heavier than it needed to, like there was wind inside too. The air hit me with that rest stop mix of bleach and old water, and underneath it a sweetness like crashed fruit. One fluorescent tube hummed and the other clicked at a steady rhythm that felt like it was teaching my heart a new beat. No one answered. I called again and stepped inside. The room was a rectangle with 3 stalls and a 4th at the far end marked out of order. 1 sink, 1 mirror, a little metal box on the wall with the ghost of a no-smoking sticker. There was no window. The wind made a sound anyway, as if it were pulling over the mouth of a bottle. I bent and looked under the stall doors. Nothing but a dark stain by the out-of-order one where a mop had been rested too long. I rapped my knuckles on each door the way you do if you're trying to be respectful and not be a creep. Nothing. The last stall was unlocked and swung toward me slow and careful, like someone was behind it trying not to be heard, and there was nothing again. Just a single wadded paper that had swollen with old water and then dried into a puck. I said, "Hello?" And my voice bounced back too quickly. I backed out because a part of me remembered the girl and didn't like how the door had thumped back against my shoulder on the way in, like someone might be leaning on it from the outside. I opened it with my foot ready like a brace. The door came easy. The walkway was empty. The girl wasn't there. I stepped out and to the left, then the right. The night took a step closer and I realized the wind had gone all at once. The brochure wasn't slapping the glass anymore. The buzz from the lights got louder because nothing else was covering it. The 2 semis still slept. The pickup at the far end looked like a props department's idea of a pickup, cut out and flat. The girl was gone, and there were little half-moons, of wet or dust, whatever they were, on the concrete, curving away toward the corner where the vending machine sat. I circled the block of building and saw nothing. I cupped my hands to the glass of the brochure room and saw my own face bleached gray, and my eyes darker than I liked. The brochure on top was for Big Bend Ranch State Park, and a photograph of a family in hats smiled with teeth that looked normal. I might have laughed then, I'm not sure. I remember a kind of small breath and a sound that wasn't mine, like when you step and hear someone else step in the room above you. "Kid?" I called. "Hey kid, I'm not leaving you." Something skittered in the prickly pear. The fence rattled once like a large animal put its chest against it and changed its mind. My scalp went tight. I walked back to the women's side and leaned in again just to be certain. Still empty. When I straightened up, I realized I was trying not to look at the mirror above the sink, and that made me mad enough at myself that I looked anyway. I saw me in the square room behind me and nothing else. That ought to have helped. It did not. I went back out and pulled my phone. I had 2 bars doing their best to pretend to be 3. I thought about who you call at 1 in the morning out there. DPS, a county sheriff who might be an hour away but would come. I imagined telling someone that there was a barefoot girl in a yellow dress who had vanished between the time I went into a bathroom and came back out. I pictured their face and heard one part of my mind say, "You don't want to be that guy." The other part said, "You don't want to read about a body in a stock tank tomorrow and tell yourself you were worried about being that guy." I went back to the men's side and used it because I needed to, and every sound I made was too loud. A stranger's sounds in a room I didn't belong. When I washed my hands, the water came out cold, and then hot, and then cold again. And for a second I saw the runoff in the bowl swirl pink like someone had rinsed a scab. I turned off the tap and the water kept running for a beat, then stopped with a sigh. My reflection looked a little more tired than it had 5 minutes before, and I told myself that was all. When I came out, there she was again. Same place by the women's door, same yellow dress, same bare feet. The smile hadn't moved. It was a relief and a shock so close together it made me dizzy. "Hey," I said, and it came out too loud. "I was worried about you. Where did you go? Your mom didn't answer." "She does not like to be watched," the girl said. "She is shy." That was a line I was willing to play through. "Okay, we can wait." "We can wait," she repeated, as if she were tasting the words while still wearing the smile. She turned her head then, just an inch or two, like she was hearing something inside the bricks. In the motion, I saw the underside of her jaw, the bruisey shadow along the hinge as if it had been held too tight. A parent's hand, a stranger's, I didn't know. The wind started again, just a little, and the light over the door flicked twice quick. I tilted my head and listened into the women's room. No sound. A car went by out on the highway, lights white and distant. For a moment, they slid across the girl's eyes and didn't change them. "You hungry?" I asked, because I didn't know what you say to a child who looks like that at 1 in the morning in a parking lot empty as a church during a rodeo. "I've got some jerky, a soda." "No," she said. "Teeth do not like sugar." I swallowed wrong. That was dumb. She was a kid. Her mom had probably told her about cavities, and now I was a weirdo who wanted to offer candy when there was none. I opened my hands again, and this time she lifted hers the tiniest bit, like she was mimicking me. I saw the underside of her fingers, and thought at first she'd written on herself with pen like kids do. Then I saw that the blue-black marks were not letters. They were tiny crescents, neat and repeating, building toward the base of each finger like someone had pinched her again and again with clipped nails. There were so many crescents that the skin looked patterned, a fish belly of scales made of bruise. "Where do you live?" I asked. "Is it close?" "Sometimes," she said, and the wind lifted her hair and laid it down. "Sometimes close." "All right," I said. "I'm going to call the sheriff and we will work it out. Nobody is in trouble." "She does not like trouble," the girl said. The smile edged a little wider. The light over the door made a noise like a fly dying. I guess I had already decided because I dialed before I finished that thought. I got an automated tree that told me to press 1 for emergency and 2 for non-emergency, and I pressed 1. The ringing sounded like it was coming from inside the concrete. A voice answered and asked for my location, and I started to give it. Mile marker, direction of travel, the name of the closest town. I was halfway through when something happened that I feel stupid about because I can't make it sound like anything but a trick. I turned to point at the girl for the dispatcher, to say, "Look, she is right here. I'm not calling for a shadow." The space by the women's door was empty. There were the little crescent prints again on the concrete, darker this time, and they went to the corner where a metal grate covered a runoff drain. The grate was bolted down with 4 hex heads. The footprints stopped before the grate. There weren't any beyond it. The dispatcher said, Sir, are you there?" I said I was, and I said there was a child, maybe 10, wearing yellow and barefoot. and that I needed someone to check the facility. I heard my own voice and hated it for how it sounded like it was looking for something to be scared of. The dispatcher said a unit would be there in 15 to 20. I said I would wait. There wasn't anything else. I paced. I leaned into the brochure room again and read a story about a ghost town's chili cook-off and wondered how many people had stood here late at night and read about happier places while they tried not to look over their shoulder. I laughed again, and this time I am sure because it sounded like someone else. I checked my truck and locked it again, though I knew I had. I stood by the women's door and thought about going back in just to prove something to myself. The light hummed. After 8 minutes by the clock, the wind stopped again. It didn't die away. It went off like someone flipped a breaker. I looked up without meaning to. The stars had done that thing where they double and then triple, and you think about how thin your skin is. There were footsteps on the concrete behind me. Bare, slow, deliberate in that careful way of someone walking in a house after others have gone to sleep. "Did you find her?" the girl said. I turned and she was there. The angle of her head was different now, a little lifted. It gave the smile a new shape. Behind her, in the glass, I saw a reflection that wasn't hers. It was a 2-second smear, and I tell myself it was mine caught wrong, but it was taller and it had a shape around the head like a hat. And I hate writing those words because it sounds like I am dressing the story to please people. I watched it stutter away into the angle and reappear as a thin white line like a horizon crossing a mouth. And then nothing. "The sheriff is on the way," I said. My mouth was dry again and the penny taste came back. "We'll wait for them, okay?" "She does not like lights," the girl said. "They hurt." "Who?" I asked, and I knew, but I asked. "Your mom." Her lips stayed in that painted smile. Her eyes looked past me to the men's door. I turned and the door was inching open against no wind. "You learn things about yourself in 3 beats of a heart. One is whether you run. One is whether you yell. The third is whether you use your hands. I did not run. I did not yell. I put my hands out the way a man does in a bar when his friend is about to fall on a table, and he knows he will be picking glass out of his skin in the morning. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I can name without making it sound like the worst parts of a campfire story. It was a shadow in the shape of a person without the person inside to hold it up, and as it came through the gap where the door had made its triangle of dark, I smelled something like a dentist's tray. If you've ever had a filling drilled and you can smell the bright burning of your own enamel, you know it. It was that, faint at first, then stronger until my eyes watered. I took a step and then another, and I said something that was supposed to be a warning but came out a prayer. The shadow shifted across the concrete like a spill. It reached the girl's bare feet and climbed her ankles. She didn't move. She said, in a voice that was smaller than the last one, "She does not like trouble," and the dark climbed her, like a dress sliding up on a hanger. It reached her mouth, and for a second the smile was the only thing left of her face. I saw the too many teeth very clearly, each one a different shade of white like they had been collected from people and put in one place. Then the shadow covered them and there was just a girl-shaped cutout of night where she had been. I moved without thinking. I reached for where her arm should be and closed my hand on cold that was not like the air. It was dense, like the cold of an ice chest that has been kept closed all day, and you open it and the first breath out of it feels older than your house. It burned my palm. I yanked. The shape pulled away with a softness that didn't match my strength. I left a smear on it the length of my fingers, 5 pale stripes that steamed. The smell of drilled enamel got so strong my stomach flipped. I let go and stumbled, and as I did, the shape, all of it, slid back toward the women's door. Not walking, not moving, just there in one space and then nearer the crack, then inside it like smoke pulled by a draft. The door swung shut. The wind returned in a burst and slapped my shirt flat and made the brochure beat the glass until a corner tore off. I grabbed at the handle and then let go because I was not going to go in there again. My hand hurt. I looked at the palm and saw a perfect crescent of blisters. 5 of them, tiny and neat where I had gripped that cold. They looked like the marks on the girl's fingers. They looked like bites. Small as a kitten's. The siren came low and slow like a lullaby. When it topped the rise to the east and the lights hit the signage, the girl was back where she had been, leaning into the corner by the women's door with the smile. The lights washed her face white, and then red and then white again, and she did not blink. The unit parked in a way that covered 2 spaces because that's how you do it when there's no one around to complain. A young trooper got out, hat pulled down, hand on his belt. Another one stayed in the car doing what I knew were the background checks that keep them alive. I told him what I could. I used words like maybe, and I think, and I'm not sure more, than I wanted. He looked where I pointed and said, "Okay, and all right, and let's have a look." And when he stepped toward the women's door, he said, "Young lady, are you waiting for your mom?" And I listened hard for her answer. The smile didn't move. She didn't speak. We checked the women's room together, lights and all. The trooper called out like I had, and a little more forcefully, and in that official way that makes a room. "Square up, state police, ma'am." And we opened each stall. Nothing. He checked the out-of-order stall and swung the door, and it bumped against a mop bucket, and he clipped it with the toe of his boot, and it rolled an inch, then stopped. He said into his radio that the facility was clear, and I stood by the mirror and made myself look into it, and this time, I did not see anything but me and a hat brim behind me and the corner of a light that needed changing. When we stepped back, out the girl was gone again. The trooper's face didn't show anything, and I appreciated that. He swept the light across the lot and into the cactus and along the fence where something had leaned and then changed its mind. He asked me to wait by my truck for a statement, and I did. He conferred with his partner, and they both walked the perimeter, and the younger one went over to the drain grate and knelt. When he came back, he had something small in his palm. He held it out to me with the tone of a man keeping the world ordinary. "Look like a tooth to you?" he asked. It did. It was tiny, the size of one of those baby teeth you see taped to construction paper in grade school. It gleamed too white under the lot lights. It had that root like a hook that made me think of fish again, and I didn't realize my hand had closed into a fist until my blisters hollered at me. We stood there while the wind flicked sand against our pants and made that sound like sifting sugar. The trooper bagged the tooth like he had done it before. He spoke in his radio voice and then in his real one when he asked me my name and took my license and told me to hang tight. I watched him write, and I watched the women's door, and I watched the corner where the girl had stood, and told myself over and over that I had done the responsible thing. I had stopped. I had looked. I had called. That's all a person can do. On the way to El Paso, I kept the radio on talk instead of music because I wanted words to fill the car and keep the silence from holding the edges. The wind died again just past Van Horn, and the truck got that buoyant feel like it was floating on glass. A sign told me how many miles to the city, and it was a number that felt like a dare. I made it before dawn and delivered the crate and shook a hand and found a motel and slept on top of the covers like a man who expects to be woken by someone banging on the door. No one knocked. I woke up on my own with my palm throbbing. The blisters had risen into perfect half moons with clear tops. When I pressed one gently, it hurt straight down to the wrist. I thought that would be it. A night's weirdness. A story. For the guys that would earn me a few insults and some attention and fade into being my thing. The way people collect their own little hauntings. I drove back that afternoon with the sun a lidless eye on my right. And when I got to the same rest stop I pulled in without meaning to, the lot was busier. A family was at a picnic table opening a cooler. The mother laughed at something the father said, and I felt that laugh in my ribs, honest and bright. I walked to the women's side because I am either brave or dumb. The concrete was clean. The light still needed changing. The drain grate had a new set of bolts that shone with a little ring of oil. A notice on the wall said, "Improvements funded by a grant," and had a date that made me feel like time had gotten confused. I went into the brochure room and took the one about Big Bend Ranch. The family from the photo smiled up at me from a place where the sky isn't as heavy. I put it back. When I turned, a little girl was looking through the glass at me. Not the girl. Another one, bare feet in pink flip-flops, hair braided neat, normal smile. Her father was behind her, and he nodded like men do to say thanks for not being a creep. I nodded back and left the building and got in my truck and drove away careful and slow, like the world was made of glass. At home, I went to my dentist because I am the sort of person who does that. He looked at my palm and asked if I had grabbed a hot pan. I said not exactly, and he looked at me over the mask with eyes that were tired from 10 hours of telling people to floss. He looked into my mouth and said my teeth looked good for a man who lives on truck stop coffee. He said the enamel was solid. He said, "You must not like sugar." I said, "I'm trying to cut down." He said, "Good. Your teeth will thank you." 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't know. It was the young trooper. He said they had walked the site again in daylight and pulled the drain cover and looked. I asked if they found anything. He paused, like a man who is making a choice. He said, "It's clean down there, sir." He said it the way you say it, when you want it to be true. I slept that night with my hand on the pillow beside my head because it helped to keep it from throbbing. Around 3, I woke because I heard the faintest sound, an almost sound like a paper brochure flapping slow against glass. It was coming from the hallway. I lay there and told myself it was the AC vent. I told myself a lot of things. The sound went away. When I woke again at 6, there was grit in my sheets like sand, and in the bathroom sink a tiny ring where a little puddle had dried to a crust the color of a tooth. You can tell yourself anything in daylight. I told myself the water in my town leaves deposits and I hadn't wiped the sink well. I keep thinking about the line the girl gave me, the one about teeth not liking sugar. It's the sort of thing a kid would say because it's what she's heard. I have not eaten a piece of candy since. The blisters healed without scarring, which should have made me happy. On the pad of my palm, if I press, I can feel 5 spots that are a little more sensitive than the rest. Tiny crescents that wake up if I hold a cold glass. I've passed that rest area twice since. Once in daylight, with traffic thick as bees. Once at night about a month later when the wind came up again and I was past Fort Stockton, and there was that sign in blue and I told myself I would keep going. I would not stop. I was not the last living person. I glanced as the lot slid by. A quick look. A habit. Under the bad light by the women's door, something small lifted its head. I couldn't swear it was a girl. I couldn't swear it was anyone. The smile was a pale line like a scratch across a photograph. I drove on with both hands on the wheel, my palm tingling where the crescents were, and the moon ahead of me looked like a tooth. Highway 6 runs long and flat through stretches of land that feel forgotten by time. A 2-lane blacktop that carries farmers, oilfield hands, and tired travelers down into the heart of Texas. I had pulled over just outside of Calvert that night, my gas gauge needle resting too close to empty, my bladder pressing hard enough to make me curse under my breath. The rest area itself was the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. A concrete box with buzzing sodium lamps over its parking lot, a faded vending machine half lit by one weak bulb, and a bathroom shack that had seen better days sometime in the late 70s. I parked my truck, glanced at the one other vehicle in the lot, a beat-up red sedan with no plates, and grabbed my wallet and phone before heading toward the men's restroom. The door was heavy steel, painted a peeling green, and it squealed when I pushed it open. The light inside flickered but held steady, humming overhead. The smell hit first, that sour ammonia mixed with damp concrete and a faint undertone of mildew. I made for the stalls, figuring the urinal wasn't an option in a place this exposed. But as I walked down the row, I realized something odd. Every single stall door was closed and latched shut. 5 of them in total, all locked, like a line of occupied rooms in a place that should have been empty. The silence told me no one was inside, but the locks suggested otherwise. I hesitated, standing there in the dim yellow light, feeling my skin prickle. I rattled the first stall. The door didn't budge. Same with the second. The third, all locked tight. No scuffling feet, no rustling, no coughs, just stillness. That uneasy feeling crept into me, the way it does when logic fails. Who the hell would lock every stall in a roadside bathroom? I wasn't about to piss myself in the corner, though. With a grunt, I crouched down and slid onto my knees, peering beneath the first door. Empty. No boots, no pants pooled at the ankles, nothing. Just a bare concrete floor. I went stall to stall, crawling under, half annoyed, half unsettled, confirming they were all empty. By the time I reached the last one, I was breathing heavier from the crawl than I cared to admit. I stood up inside, the final stall, brushing dust off my jeans, but then something stopped me cold. In that silence, I heard it. Breathing. Soft at first, barely perceptible but growing more distinct the longer I froze and listened. Slow, steady inhalations, shallow exhalations. The sound didn't come from one direction. It was all around, me bouncing off the tiled walls, circling like I was standing in the middle of a crowded room where no one spoke. I spun around. Empty stall. I shoved the door open and stepped into the main restroom again. Every stall door was shut tight, same as before. My chest tightened and I strained my ears, the hum of the lights mixing with the soft sound of that breathing. Except now it seemed closer, almost right behind me. I turned so fast my shoulder smacked the tiled wall. Nothing there. My own ragged breath mixed with the other, slower ones. I told myself I was imagining it, that the acoustics were tricking me. The old ventilation may be hissing in the walls, but the vents above were clogged with spider webs and dust, dead as bone. I forced myself toward the urinal, trying to shake it off, fumbling with my zipper all the while that breathing swelled in my ears. My nerves spiked when I realized I wasn't just hearing it. I was feeling it, air stirring faintly against the back of my neck like someone close enough to whisper. My knees almost buckled. I zipped up half-finished and backed away, scanning every corner, every shadow. The light above flickered once, dimmed, then steadied again. My phone felt like a lifeline in my pocket, so I yanked it out, thumb hovering over the flashlight icon. The moment I switched it on, the stalls all rattled at once. Every door shook violently, metal hinges screeching, locks clicking as if someone inside each one was pushing against them from within. The sound echoed like thunder in that cramped space. I stumbled back, slamming into the sinks, my flashlight, beam jerking across doors that still stayed firmly shut despite the violent shaking. My heart slammed against my ribs, breath catching in my throat. Then it stopped. Silence again, so absolute I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, shoving it so hard it banged against the outer wall. The night air hit me like salvation, humid and heavy but alive. I sprinted to my truck, keys trembling in my grip, half expecting something to grab my ankle before I reached it. Once inside, I locked the doors and fired the engine. My headlights cut across the parking lot, sweeping over the red sedan. It was gone. No sound of an engine, no taillights down the highway. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. I tore out of that lot, gravel spitting, my rearview mirror useless because I couldn't bring myself to look into it. I drove until the adrenaline ebbed enough for my hands to stop shaking. When I finally pulled over at a gas station in College Station, I went straight into their restroom. Fluorescent lights, 2 stalls, one open, one closed. I forced myself to check. Empty, just as it should be. But as I stood there splashing water on my face at the sink, I noticed it again. Faint, almost buried beneath the hum of the air conditioner. Breathing. I haven't stopped hearing it since that night. Sometimes it's in quiet rooms, sometimes when I'm alone in my truck. And the worst part is, it doesn't feel like I'm imagining things anymore. It feels like whatever was in that restroom on Highway 6 crawled under the stall with me. And it's still here, always just out of sight, always waiting. It was late spring when I parked my truck near the rest stop outside Navasota, one of those stretches of Texas highway where the woods press in close, and the only light after sunset comes from the sodium lamps that flicker over cracked concrete. I'd been driving since Houston, worn out, looking for a place to stretch my legs and catch a nap before pushing farther west. The air was warm but not unbearable, the kind of evening where you leave your window down just enough to let in the smell of cut grass and diesel drifting from the road. I had no plans to stay long. The place felt too still, too forgotten, as if it had been built for a crowd that never came. There were no cars when I pulled in, no semis idling, no other travelers unpacking their coolers or stretching under the lights. Just me and the hum of the lamps. I sat for a while, engine off, listening to cicadas rattling in the trees. The quiet was almost peaceful. Almost. After a few minutes, I reclined my seat and closed my eyes. That was when I heard it. It started faint, so faint I thought it was my radio picking up bleed from some local station. Accordion music, the kind you hear in Tejano songs. The kind that makes you think of dance halls, beer-stained floors, and couples moving slow under string lights. The sound wasn't crisp like a recording. It had weight and depth, drifting on the warm air, the bellows rising and falling in a rhythm that didn't quite match any song I knew. At first I smiled. It reminded me of my grandfather's neighbor back in Brazos County, an old man who played on his porch until dusk. But after a few measures, something in the sound set me on edge. The melody was wrong, the way it looped and stumbled, like someone fumbling through half-remembered notes. And more than that, it was too close. It wasn't coming from the distance, from some dance or backyard party hidden in the trees. It was right there, in the lot with me. I sat up, eyes scanning through the windshield. Empty pavement stretched in every direction, pale under the glow of the lamps. No cars had pulled in. No one was walking around. Yet the music continued, weaving through the silence as if invisible hands pressed the keys and pulled the bellows, just outside my door. I rolled my window down farther, leaned out. The music stopped instantly, cut clean, leaving only the buzz of the lamps and the faint whistle of insects in the grass. I waited, listening, but nothing came. After a minute, I laughed under my breath, told myself it had to be something on, the radio after all, some static tricking me while I drifted off. I settled back, rolled the window up, and closed my eyes again. Not 2 minutes later, the accordion returned. This time, louder, clearer. It played a series of notes that bent upward, then dragged down, the sound curling around me like a slow breath. The hair on my arms rose. I turned the key, the dash lighting up, but the radio was already off. I checked twice, twisting the dial. Silence. I turned it on, scanned stations. Nothing but static. Then silence when I killed it again. Still, the accordion played, and I swear I felt the vibrations in my chest, like someone sitting in the back seat squeezing the bellows in time, with their lungs. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, staring at the rearview mirror. Nothing moved in the reflection. Nothing sat in the back. But the music was behind me. No question. I opened the door and stepped out, heart pounding. The sound ceased, just like before. The lot was empty, the night air heavy with humidity, the cicadas still rasping. I walked a slow circle around my truck, peering into the shadows at the edge of the trees. The lamps didn't reach far, and beyond the glow, the woods were pure black, thick with vines and branches. No movement, no sound of boots or laughter, or breath. I stood there longer than I should have, until the quiet pressed on my ears so hard I climbed back inside just to break it. The moment the door shut, the accordion sighed back to life, softer now, mournful, as if mocking me for leaving. My pulse hammered in my neck. I didn't dare move again. Instead, I sat still, frozen, listening to the melody rise and fall. The tune shifted into something familiar, almost a waltz, though broken and off-key. Then came something that made my stomach drop. I heard a voice, faint and hollow, humming along with the music, not singing words, just humming, deep and nasal like an old man who knew the song by heart. I turned, scanning the back seat again. Empty. The hum grew stronger, weaving with the accordion, until it sounded like the player was sitting right outside my door, back pressed against the panel, humming through his nose while his fingers stumbled the buttons. I whispered a curse under my breath, reached for the keys. The instant I twisted them, the music stopped. Silence again, thick and absolute. My headlights cut across the lot, twin beams striking empty concrete and brush. I didn't wait. I threw it into drive and pulled out fast, tires spitting gravel as I swung back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, lined with trees that leaned close as if trying to hear. I drove 10 miles before I let myself ease off the gas, before I glanced in the mirrors again. Nothing followed. No sound but the low growl of my engine and the soft static hiss of tires on asphalt. My body started to loosen, though I kept the radio off, unwilling to hear another sound that wasn't mine. That's when I noticed the faintest whisper of music again. So faint I thought it was my imagination. But it grew, measure by measure, as if the accordion had crawled inside the truck itself, pressing notes between the throb of the engine. My chest tightened. I rolled down the window, hoping the rush of air would drown it out. It didn't. The music stayed steady, inside, not outside. I gripped the wheel and focused on the yellow lines. I didn't stop driving until dawn, somewhere near College Station, where the sun bled up over the trees and the light finally chased the last notes away. I sat in a diner with bad coffee and worse eggs, trying to tell myself I'd been dreaming. That exhaustion had twisted my senses. But when I walked back to my truck after breakfast, I froze. On the hood, faint in the morning dew, were streaks shaped like fingers dragging long and uneven, as if someone had rested a hand and pulled it slow across the metal. 5 lines. No footprints in the gravel. No one else around. Just those marks, already drying in the heat. I stood there staring, heart rattling in my chest, while a part of me swore I could still hear the last wheeze of the bellows hiding in the silence. I never took that route through Navasota again. I was halfway between Dallas and the Gulf, running late with a pickup bed full of warped cabinet doors that a contractor in Conroe swore he needed by morning. There was a line of storms crawling in from Madisonville, and the air felt like a damp rag twisting over your mouth. I had the window cracked and the AC on low, and the radio was giving me a sermon on a static-laced AM station about how you always return what you borrow, even if it was pain. On I-45 near Huntsville, the pine woods press right up to the highway, and the ground smells like pitch, and when the wind dies, the smell of it rides along in your vents. There are signs for the prison long before you see it. The big brick walls and the guard towers appear almost by accident, like you looked away, and Huntsville slid under your tires in the time it takes to swallow. I passed the green sign for the Sam Houston National Forest and watched the last smear of sunset drain down between the trees, and told myself I would push another 20 miles, maybe 30, and then nap at a rest stop. I knew the spot. It sits a shade south of town, where the shoulders widen and the state plants a few picnic tables and a blue-lit bathroom with vending machines that never work. Truckers sit there with their engines ticking down, and you can hear the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The first time I stopped there, I was 20, riding shotgun for a boss who chewed grape cigars and called me boy even after I turned 21. The last time before this night had been a winter afternoon when fog lay low over the highway, and the towers of the prison rose like chimneys out of flour. That day I saw a bus with barred windows roll by. On the side it said Texas, Department of Criminal Justice. Men sat inside with faces like coins. Some watched the trees, some watched their shoes. Blue sleeves, orange sleeves, hands flattened on the glass. I remember thinking how a hand on glass looks the same whether a man is about to be free or never going to be. It was near midnight when I pulled in. The rain was still flirting with the idea of arriving. The lot was half full. A long refrigerated rig idled at the far edge, humming like a big cat. A pair of SUVs huddled near the bathrooms. Somebody had left a styrofoam cup on the curb, and it scooted a little in the wind and made a soft hollow sound. I parked under a light where moths battered the plastic lens and left powdery commas. I took off my cap, rubbed my eyes, rolled the seat back, and let the engine click into that cooling state where it makes little metallic pings. When I was a kid, those sounds meant safety. Dad would pull us into a lot like this on long drives, to Galveston, and say we were camping without mosquitoes, and my sister and I would pretend the moths were tiny angels. You grow, and the same sounds turn into the table legs creaking in an empty house. I set my phone alarm for 20 minutes. The world tilted once and then went flat. Sleep came like a dull wave. It wasn't deep. It wasn't the kind where you dream landscapes. It was a hard, thin sleep, like someone put a wet cloth over my face and said, "This is all you get until morning." I woke to my own breath fogging the cab. The rain had arrived in a soft way, a sift of drops that made more noise on the roof than they had any right to make. In the light of the pole above me, I could see the glass was filmed, and for a second I thought I had slept an hour. It had that early morning sheen, and the trees were black shapes with white edges. I blinked and cleared a patch with the back of my hand, and that's when I saw the handprint. It was on the inside of the windshield. It was small. The palm was crooked, and the fingers were spread as if the hand had been pressed flat and then slid a little down the glass. The thing that struck me wasn't the print itself, it was the color. A faint, chalky blue, the shade of laundry detergent in a bucket before you add water. I sat there with my hand half raised and the back of it cooling from the glass. I looked around the cab like it would offer me an answer. The lock was down. The passenger door was clicked shut. The back window of the pickup had its latch down. I told myself I must have smudged window cleaner weeks ago and now it had dried in a strange way, and when I wiped it, it made a hand. I reached up with my fingertip and touched the index finger of the print. The residue came off on my skin. It felt like powder. It smelled like the kind of soap they use in public bathrooms, the kind that slaps your nose and says sterile. The alarm on my phone chirped. Those 2 notes sounded like a joke in that cab, like a little stupid bird singing, while something stared at me. I don't carry much superstition, but I carry a good amount of stubborn. I pulled the old shirt I use as a rag out from behind the seat and scrubbed the glass. The print smeared and then thinned and then vanished, leaving only the arc where my rag traveled. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over. The radio hissed. The sermon was gone. There was a woman now, soft-voiced, reading school closings like we were on the rim of a freeze. I backed out, checked the mirrors, and told myself the whole thing was a little bit of nothing. On the highway, a state trooper slid by me doing 80 and never looked back. The rain thickened and the tires hissed. I kept waiting for the anxiety to lift. That's how it usually goes. The road takes it. The white lines and the numbers take it. I went 10 miles and felt worse. I went 20 and my skin felt tight, like the air in the cab had been used up. The windshield wipers beat their steady time. In the sheen of the glass, when a car passed and their lights made that faint ghost reflection of the interior, I kept thinking I saw the blue again. Not a clear mark, not where I had cleaned, just the suggestion of fingers. I turned off at a gas station in New Waverly and got coffee I didn't want and snacks I didn't need, and stood under the fluorescent lights until the clerk said I was blocking her line. On my way back out, I saw the prison bus again, a different one, rolling by in the rain with a red taillight out. Through the tinted glass, I saw no faces at all, which felt worse than seeing the men. I watched it go south and wondered if you get used to being moved in a vehicle you don't control. We all do, I suppose. We call it a life and keep our hands on the wheel anyway. I made Conroe by 2, slept in the cab outside the contractor's gate because he wouldn't answer his phone, delivered at 6, and headed back north with an empty bed that whistled a little. By then I had talked myself into a fuller story. Cleaning residue. Vending machine soap on my hand that I pressed against the glass when I was half asleep. A smear of blue from the rag. Something pedestrian. The human. Brain is a nest-building creature and it prefers soft things. It lines empty spots with fabric and tells you that's insulation. 2 nights later, I had to make the same run. Dallas to Conroe, same crate of wrong-cut doors now recut. I told myself I would avoid that rest stop. Then I told myself I was an idiot. The rest stop was a patch of concrete with a bathroom and a light. It had no intentions. It wasn't the kind of place that knows your name. But on the way down, I kept my eyes forward and let my energy find a different off-ramp. I was proud of that for exactly 8 minutes. And then my head started to nod and tilt, and the words on the billboards got gummy, and the road did that thing, where it lifts and you feel you are floating a 1/4 inch above it. I signaled and pulled into the same lot. When you're tired enough, your decisions get made for you. I parked under a different light for good measure. I sat for a minute, with the engine on, and then turned it off. The rain was gone. The humidity had doubled in its absence. A dog barked from somewhere in the pines, and the sound carried like someone dragged a chair over cement. I rolled the seat back. I said out loud, "You're fine, you big baby." And then I slept. When I woke, there were 2 prints. They were side by side. They were placed lower, almost level with the dashboard, as if someone small had peered over it. The same chalky blue, the same slide. Between them was a faint arc shaped like a thumb pressed and moved. I was already sitting up before fear registered. My hands moved on their own and started wiping like I could erase a fact. My rag came away bluer than before. I could smell the stuff without lifting it to my nose. It was the same bitter clean smell from bathrooms in state buildings and hospitals, and the kind of gas stations where you hand over keys for the privilege of a cracked door. Under the smell was something else. A dampness like you get from old clothes kept too long in a plastic bag. I got out of the truck. The air hugged me like a wet coat. The light over my stall buzzed and dimmed and brightened. Bugs thrummed against Tharsin. I stood with my hands on my hips and looked at the trees. The pines looked back like they always do, casual and unworried. I walked to the bathroom and pushed the door with my knuckles. The tile inside was the same as every state bathroom tile, deliberate and cheap. The air had that bright chemical coldness. The mirror was dented in one corner. A man at the far urinal looked like he had been poured into his jeans. He glanced at me with eyes that had never liked anything. I ran cold water and scrubbed my hands with whatever soap they had. The soap was clear. It smelled like fake citrus. When I rinsed my hands and looked down at the basin, little streaks of blue curled in the runoff like smoke. I walked back to the truck, and when I got close I could see a third handprint. This one wasn't on the windshield. It was on the inside of the passenger side window. It was higher than the others. The fingers pointed up toward the headliner. I told myself to get in and go. The body sometimes listens to instruction like a good dog, and sometimes it pretends it didn't hear. Mine stood there. I put my hand up to the glass but didn't touch it. The print on the inside sat with a space, matching the width of the glass between us, and that space felt like a thing you could fall into. I snapped a picture with my phone because the part of me that doesn't believe anything is always hungry. The flash popped and ate the world and gave it back smaller. The photo looked like a staged Halloween trick. In a group chat it would have gotten a row of laughing faces. While I stared at the photo, my phone vibrated with a news alert. A headline about a storm over the Gulf and possible surge up the bays. The normal world clanged back in. I opened the driver's door and slid inside, and closed it and felt better. The cab of a truck is a home you can move, and homes are where we don't suffer fools. I put the key in and turned and pulled out, and this time I kept the radio off because I decided that if a human voice was going to talk to me in there, it had better belong to a human. On the way south, a white van tailed me for 5 miles and then passed. Its windows were painted over from the inside, but someone had scratched clear patches in the paint the size of hands. The shapes were about the same as on my windshield. I looked at the driver and wished I hadn't. He had a neck tattoo of a blue cross. He didn't look like a guard. He didn't look like a minister. He looked like a man who had done a lot of waiting in places without clocks. When he got ahead of me and merged back into my lane, I saw that the back doors of the van were held closed with chain and a padlock. The chain was new. The padlock wasn't. I made the drop and came back the same night because if I stayed in Conroe, I'd drink cheap beer with men who complain about lumber prices and forget to call my sister back. I told myself I'd choose a different rest stop. When the blue highway sign started telling me what was up ahead, the list read the same: fuel, food, lodging, rest area. Sometimes the universe lays a trail with so much obviousness that to ignore it would be to deny gravity. I pulled in again. I was tired past logic. I was tired down where the bones think. I had an idea by then, too. I didn't say it out loud because words are invitations, but I had it, and that made it worse. I parked in a different slot under a dead light. The darkness above the cab felt honest. I rolled the window down a hair to let the air move. I took the rag from the seat and folded it clean on the dashboard. It was my lifeline or my flag, depending how you want to read it. I leaned the seat back. I closed my eyes and tried to stay awake. The thing about trying to stay awake is it teaches you what a small animal you are. The first time your eyes close, they close like a blink. The second time, they hold a little longer. By the 5th or 6th, What you are instructing yourself not to do becomes the only thing you know how to do. I drifted and came back and drifted again, and on the last drift I heard the soft sound of skin on glass. It was the sound of a hand pressing and releasing. I didn't open my eyes. I lay there and counted my breaths and focused on the air moving in and out of my nostrils, like focusing could make me invisible. The sound came again, a gentle pat, a slide, a second pat near it, higher, a third to the right, lower. A cluster of gentle contacts, like rain that had decided to mimic fingers. Opened my eyes as slowly as I could. The cab was darker now. A cloud had moved over the moon. The interior was a shadow of itself. For a second I saw nothing but my own faint reflection. Then the next print appeared. It developed the way a Polaroid does, an oval of palm, then the rise of fingers, then the whirls and the tips, as if something inside the blue remembered someone's identity. I watched and did not move. The print was on the inside. It was inches from my face on the windshield, just to the left of my line of sight. Another one bloomed to the right, then higher, and there over the passenger side vent one more. I didn't count them. Counting would have made me a man in charge of a situation. I was not that man. The smell thickened until my tongue tasted it. The cleaner smell, and under it, the bagged laundry damp. Under that was a third thing that I still can't name. It had to do with time. Something tapped the right side window. The tap was not a threat. It was a request. I turned my head a quarter inch, and that was all I could make myself do. Outside, the trees stood where they had always stood. The pole lights hummed. The bathroom door opened and closed, and a man in a ball cap shuffled out and drove away, and never once looked in my direction. The tap came again. I leaned forward and put my right hand on the passenger seat and my left hand on the wheel, and told myself that if I saw a face I would accept that, and continue. That is a lie. If I had seen a face, I would have left the truck in park and walked into the trees until I could not see the lot anymore. No face came. The window had fogged at the edges. In the clear spot, mid-pane, a handprint flowered and held. The size was wrong for a man. It was small, maybe a child. No lines cut in the palm like you see on grown folks. The fingers tapered and the thumb sat a little high, as if the maker had been reaching up and slightly backward. My mind went to the prison. It is impossible for it not to go there once the word Huntsville sits in your mouth. The Walls unit is right off the square. You could throw a stone from a coffee shop and hit the wall. That is a thing I've always known without liking it. The state does its business in a building of red brick with Romanesque arches. They bring the condemned in and they don't bring them out. Families wait in rooms that smell like sanitizer and old furniture. The only color you might remember is the blue of a correctional officer's sleeve. The rest is a smear of white and brown tile and beige chairs. I had never been inside. I didn't need to go inside to see it. Those places leak their image into the towns around them. It gets into the soil like fertilizer you never ordered. I said a little prayer, not because I am good at them, but because I wanted the act of choosing words that aren't lies. I said, if you want a ride, I can't take you. I said, if you want a witness, I can try to be that. I said, if you want your name spoken, I can try, but I don't know it. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone who hadn't slept. The smell shifted. That is the detail that sticks. It lifted from chemical to something like fabric softener, jasmine faint and cheap, and underneath it, a hot metal smell like irons. It made me think of laundry. There are stories that go around about the prison laundry at Huntsville. Men boil rags and dye bleeds into the water. Officers wear blue and handle shirts with tongs. The idea that everything can be made clean with enough temperature is one of those little American myths that will outlive us all. The handprints brightened. The blue took on a faint glow, which is not something I would have believed myself capable of typing in a sane moment. The prints brightened and then faded together like someone took a picture and then walked away with the light. My chest loosened. My hands hurt. I realized I had been holding the wheel hard enough to make my fingernails ache. I exhaled and it sounded like a tire going soft. I reached for the key. Before I could turn it, someone knocked on the glass beside my left ear. 1, 2, 3. Not loud, not polite, just the rhythm a friend might use if you were late and they were out of patience. There was a blue handprint on the driver's side window inches from my face. It was bigger than the others. Thin fingers. Long palm. The thumb sat low, not like a child's. I turned my head slowly and saw my own face behind it. I was pale, and sweat stood out at my hairline, and a moth thinking it had found the moon collided with the outside of the window and died and smeared. The blue handprint stayed. I raised my own left hand and held it over the shape without touching the glass. My fingertips lined up. The size was almost mine. The feeling that came then was strange. Not fear, not pity, a kind of angry tenderness, like the way you feel toward a dog that has been whipped by another man and bites you when you try to help. I said again, I can't take you. I don't take passengers. The rules are what keep the wheels on. The handprint did not fade. It pressed and dragged down and left a comet tail of blue. It asked, it begged. Or I imagined it begged because I didn't want to think it was telling me something. I started the engine. The light on the dome flicked and went off as the fan kicked. I backed out slow. The handprint stayed on the glass the way grief stays on a face. On the highway I ran the wipers and they did nothing. I ran the defroster and it made the smell bloom and then vanish. By the time I passed the exit for the prison, the driver's window was clear. The windshield held a few faint smears like breath you can't catch. You would think that would be the end of it. It would be in a story where the writer had a well-mannered sense of justice. The truth is that ever since that night, whenever I'm on that stretch, whether I stop or not, whether I am alone or not, whether the weather is wet or dry, I wake from short roadside naps with blue on the inside of my glass. Sometimes it is only a finger mark. Sometimes it is a palm and 5 prints above it, like someone climbed a steep pane. Twice I have woken with twin handprints over my eyes like a child playing a game. The color is always the same. The smell is always the same. The first few times, I went out of my way to avoid Huntsville. I took roads that added hours, then stopped avoiding because avoidance is just a different form of being followed. I told my sister in a sideways way. She said I was overworked. People who love you want the world to be fixable. She gave me the number of a therapist in Dallas who turns out to be very good at teaching you to name what is not in the room. I sit in a chair across from him and say, the words blue and hand and print. He says, what do those words mean to you? And I say they mean nothing, and he says, try again. And I say they mean someone who was pressing from a place where doors don't open. He nods like that is acceptable and writes, and I look at his pen and wonder if the ink is blue. I am not mocking him. He is doing his part. A month after the first night with the cluster of prints, I took a detour into town. I parked a few blocks, off the square where you can still find a barber who cuts hair with a straight razor on the neck. The prison wall looks like a school from a distance and like a blunt instrument up close. A tour group of college kids with lanyards stood across the street taking pictures, their faces lit by phones even as they aimed their phones at the building. I stood back. I didn't want to catch myself in the reflection of the doors. There is a museum there, and on another day I might have gone in to see the history of chains and the badge displays arranged by decade. Not that day. I walked one slow block around the outside. I looked at the color of the officers' sleeves when they went in and out. It is not the exact blue of my prints. It is a harder blue, darker, made to hide stains. But near the cuffs, where fabric wears thin from use, there is a chalkiness. It looks like the ghost of a brighter dye. In a second-floor window, I saw a rectangle of light where someone forgot to lower a blind. And in that window, a woman stood with her hands clasped at her stomach. She wore a visitor's tag. Her face had that emptied look. Her hands made slow circles against her belly. I looked away because there are moments private enough to demand strangers turn their heads. When I looked back, the window was dark. I have my suspicions about the blue. I don't need them to be right. The story that fits best is simple and unsatisfying like most. Laundry, bleach and dye and heat. Things washed and hung and folded by men who have no choice. A child taken on a visit, fingers pressed to glass of a car while a parent goes inside, hands everywhere afterward because children touch everything. Those same fingers later pressing the inside of windshields while they sleep years on. A man moved from unit to unit, from pack to pack, from bus to bus. Hands on the glass when the road hums and life runs like a river he can see but not step into. A color clinging to the skin like a smell, refusing to go somewhere safe. I store these thoughts in the glove box with napkins and old registrations. I keep the glove box closed. The only thing I have that counts as evidence sits on the dash in the day and goes in the center console at night. It is a small fragment of glass from a windshield, a piece left when a gravel truck spit a white stone and made a star in my view. I had the windshield replaced the next week and asked the man to cut me a shard from the cracked one because I was spinning out by then, and everything felt like it might be the key. The glass caught the blue. Not in night. A print. In a faint film that only shows when you hold it to the light at a certain angle. I keep meaning to take it to a lab, as if I know a place that will do that work for someone who pays in 20s and has no scientific purpose. I haven't. I suspect it would be cleaner to let the object be what it is. A thing I touch when I am at a stoplight, a thing that feels like the shoulder of an explanation. This past August, I pulled into the rest stop again because by then it had become a ritual. The heat had reduced itself to its core and everything you smelled was cooked. The pines clicked. The cars came in like sleepers and left like thieves. I parked near the edge and turned off the engine and lay my left palm on the steering wheel and told whatever might be listening that I was tired. I said it plain because truth is a cheap lock and sometimes it holds for a night. I shut my eyes. The dream that came was not a landscape, it was a room. I stood in a narrow hallway with tile walls, tile floor, tile ceiling. The air had no temperature. In the dream I knew there were doors, but someone had removed the knobs. On my left there was a rectangle of stronger light and a window that didn't open. On the other side of the window were trees, pine, oak, a tatter of Spanish moss. The window glass had a faint blue cast to it, the kind you see in old bottles. I lifted my hand and pressed my palm to the pane. It was warmer than I expected. A hand met mine on the other side. Same size, same shape. When the hand met mine, the light outside the trees blued a fraction more, and for an instant I could see not the forest, but a line of cars angled in a quiet lot, and inside them the shapes of people who had thought a nap would be free. My hand held to the other hand, there was a hum, a vent, a fan, a highway. I told the other hand I was sorry, and the other hand squeezed once, and in that squeeze was something like agreement and something like pity. And then I was in my seat with the moths batting at the light again and the AC wheezing back to life and a truck pulling in on my right, its brakes exhaling as if relieved to be still. There was a new handprint on the inside of my windshield when I woke. It was not blue, it was colorless. It was the print you make with your own oils without knowing, a gloss on a mat. I wiped at it and it did not fade. I set my palm over it and my palm fit. That night I drove north without turning on the radio. I kept the windows down. I let the hot air in and I let it carry away the smell of cleaners and pressed shirts. In my mirror, the prison slid behind trees, and then behind my back, and then behind the curvature of memory where the road stores what it can't hold. Months later, on a wet drive before dawn, the blue returned like a relative you never invited who shows up with a suitcase and a look that says, "You owe me nothing except your couch." Sometimes the prints come as I sleep, and sometimes they come when I am wide awake at 70. They do not make me swerve. They do not try to kill me. They arrive and wait and fade. There is a lesson in that, and I refuse to teach it, because teaching would imply understanding. If you stop at that rest area, south of Huntsville, and close your eyes and take 20 minutes from the road, you may wake to find the same faint marks on your glass. Maybe yours will be clear. Maybe they will be pale blue. Maybe you will smell nothing and call me a liar. Maybe you will look up the old stories and find some mention of a prisoner transport that never made it to the unit, a crash on a wet shoulder, uniform soaked, chemical dyes leaching. Maybe you will read about a visitor who left a child in a running car with the AC on and the doors locked while she went to sign a paper she had to sign. and the child pressed his hands to glass in boredom, until those hands stained. I have read both those stories in papers that spelled names wrong and buried the details near advertisements for lawnmowers. 2 clippings folded at the bottom of my center console, though I do not know if either is the right one. What I know is this. There are places where pieces of people hang on, the flattened parts that fit to our man-made surfaces. We build lanes through pine and fence the pines and draw maps of what we think we control. And the marks that keep showing up are a reminder that glass is not a boundary so much as a confession, a sheet we hold between our faces and the world, and then act surprised when something writes on it. I can clean the prints when I want to. A spray of Windex and a steady hand and the blue thins and the smell lifts, and all that remains is the faint idea of fingers. I do not always clean them. Sometimes I drive all the way to Dallas with a child's hand beside my field of view, and if the sun hits right, the mark shines and I have to squint and shift in my seat. When I park under the oak in my complex, I sit and look at my own reflection laid under the print, and I wait for the sound of the cicadas to pull me back into a normal that looks like a parking lot. Then I go inside and put my keys in a bowl and wash my hands with mild soap and try not to look at the color that sometimes rings the sink. On nights when the weather is loud, thunder over the metroplex, wind working its way around buildings it didn't plan for, I wake with the taste of dryer sheets in my mouth and the sense that someone is pressing a palm to the inside of the window by my bed. There is never a mark there. That feels like mercy. If you ask me what it wants, I'll say nothing. If you ask me what it is, I'll say something that persists. That is not an answer meant to comfort. It is the best one I can give without borrowing, a story that does not belong to me. The blue handprints are not a warning. They are not a curse. They are not the promise of a crash you can avoid by hypothetical goodness. They are sign and residue. They are the visible proof that somewhere, not far from a parking lot where moths die on plastic lights, a door shut and did not open, and whatever was inside did not drain away. It pressed to the nearest surface and waited for the next face to come along and look at it. If you are that face, try not to lie to yourself. Clean it if you want, leave it if you can. Either way, drive careful past Huntsville. When the trees begin and the smell of pitch comes through the vents and the signs turn green and talk about the forest, know that there are hands in that place that still remember how to ask. If you must sleep at the rest stop, set your alarm for 20 minutes, not 30. Pull the seat back. Keep your keys where your hand can find them in the dark. When you wake and see the pale shape on the inside of the glass, do not put your palm over it unless you are prepared to feel the warm illusion of another palm on the other side. If you do it anyway, and most of us eventually do, be honest. Say the name you think belongs to it even if you're wrong. Leave a rag folded on the dash. Paint is always cheaper than truth. But truth lingers, blue as laundry water in a dirty sink, and it dries slow in the Texas heat. Out there in the emptiness of Big Bend, where the desert swallows your headlights whole and the night presses in like a black ocean, I learned something about roads. I learned that not everything sharing the pavement with you has weight or flesh, or even substance, but it can still kill you all the same. I wasn't even supposed to be on that stretch of highway. I'd been driving west from Fort Stockton after sunset, the heat still radiating off the asphalt even though the air had cooled into the high 70s. I had the windows cracked, the smell of dust and creosote bush drifting in, and a bag of sunflower seeds keeping me awake. The radio had gone silent hours earlier, just static, so I drove with nothing but the hum of my engine and the occasional clatter of seeds against the floorboard. The rest stop appeared like a mirage on the side of 385, a low-lit structure with 2 vending machines, a flickering street light, and a scattering of picnic tables that looked as though no one had sat at them in years. I pulled in because my bladder was screaming and my legs ached from holding steady on those long, hypnotic stretches of road. The men's room smelled of ammonia and age, the kind of smell that clings to your nose even when you step back outside. I relieved myself, splashed water on my face, and walked back to my truck feeling a little more awake, though not entirely. That's when I noticed the other vehicle. It was parked at the far edge of the lot, maybe 50 yards from me. A boxy shape, older looking, hard to tell the make under that weak yellow light. Its windows were dark, no dome light flicked on, no sound of a door creaking, just a presence there like it had been waiting. I got in my truck, started the engine, and checked my mirrors. The other car didn't move. Still, as I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I kept glancing back, and for the first few miles, the desert was as empty as ever. Then maybe 10 miles out, headlights appeared behind me. They came quick, 2 sharp white beams cresting over a low hill, steady and focused like the driver had his brights on. I flicked mine once, the polite little signal, but they didn't dim. Instead, they closed the gap, hovering just far enough, back that I couldn't make out the car itself, just the glare in my mirrors. I sped up. They sped up. The desert doesn't give you cover. No billboards, no trees, just scrub brush and the silhouette of distant mesas under a moon that seemed too small. Those headlights glued themselves to me mile after mile, and my throat went dry. I slowed down once, thinking maybe they'd pass, but they didn't. They slowed too, hanging back, matching me like we were tethered. Another 5 miles like that, just me, the road, and that glow in my rear view. Finally, in frustration, I tapped my brakes hard, enough to make my taillights flare like blood in the mirror. The headlights behind me swerved like the driver had been caught off guard, and for a split second I thought I saw the outline of the car. Dark, low, maybe something like a Crown Vic. But then it was gone, washed out again by the glare. I was sweating by then, my knuckles aching from how tight I gripped the wheel. The idea of pulling over crossed my mind, but stopping in that emptiness felt worse than keeping on. So I pushed the truck up to 85, the engine rattling, tires humming over cracked asphalt. The headlights stuck with me. Closer now. Too close. My chest tightened as I imagined the impact, the crunch of steel, my truck rolling end over end into the desert scrub. I muttered aloud, "Back off, damn it." My voice sounded small. Then, without warning, they vanished. Not like they turned off, not like the driver slowed or took an exit. One moment they were there, burning into my retinas. The next, I was staring into an empty black highway stretching on for miles. I slowed, craning my neck, twisting around to see if maybe they'd dropped back. Nothing. The only light was my own beams cutting into the dark. And yet when I looked forward again, I saw something that made me slam the brakes. Up ahead, maybe, 100 yards, 2 scorch marks stretched across the asphalt. Long black streaks side by side, as if something had pressed down into the road with impossible heat. My truck skidded to a stop, the smell of hot rubber filling the cab. I sat there, heart pounding, staring at those blackened marks that glowed faintly under my headlights. I should have driven on. I should have ignored it, but something in me needed proof. I opened the door, the desert wind brushing my face dry and thin. I walked up to the marks, boots crunching on grit, and squatted down. The asphalt was warped, blistered in places, and radiating warmth like it had just come out of a fire pit. My hand hovered an inch above and I could feel it. Heat. Out there in the middle of nowhere, in the cool night, the road itself was still cooking. I straightened, my skin crawling, and glanced back at my truck. That's when I saw them again. The headlights, only this time they weren't behind me. They were off the side of the road, maybe 20 yards into the scrub, glowing faintly among the mesquite-like eyes. No engine sound, no dust kicked up, just light, watching. I bolted back into the truck, slamming the door so hard the window rattled. I fired the engine, spun the wheel, and gunned it forward, swerving around the scorched marks. I didn't look back again. Not until I hit Marathon hours later, and even then I only dared a glance. The road was empty. No lights, no cars. But I swear even now if I close my eyes I can still see that glow hovering in the brush. Like whatever it was didn't follow me on pavement anymore, but it had found another way to keep pace. I still have the truck. There are 2 dark streaks. Across the rear bumper, charred lines that no wax or paint will cover. They weren't there before that night. Mechanics tell me it looks like burn damage, like something scorched the metal without flame. I don't argue. I just keep driving, keep checking my mirrors, and keep wondering when those lights will come back, because out in Big Bend, the night doesn't forgive curiosity, and it sure as hell doesn't let you forget. West of El Paso, out where the desert stretches in pale yellows and browns and the wind can cut like glass in the evenings, there's a rest stop crews had been renovating for months. I worked with them during one of those contracts that took me farther than I liked from home. A job that felt cursed the minute I stepped onto the lot. It was late September, warm by day, freezing by night, and the place stood like a slab of concrete and fluorescent hum at the edge of nowhere. The land around it rolled in low mesquite and yucca, with sand so fine it seeped into boots and seemed to hiss in your ears when the wind shifted. Every trucker who pulled in looked like he was stopping at the last civilized patch before heading into something emptier and far less forgiving. That was the atmosphere we worked under, pouring cement, cutting pipe, bolting in fixtures, and hearing stories that made the restrooms more infamous than the coyotes that howled out there after dark. The men's side was always the problem. The women's facility was plain, quiet, smelled like new tile and bleach. But the men's stalls carried a strange reputation that spread through the crew long before I ever saw anything myself. The first time I heard it was from a pipe fitter named Ramos. He came out pale, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd seen something that soured his stomach. He said he'd gone in with a wrench in his pocket, intent on tightening a fitting behind one of the toilet tanks. And when he pushed open the stall door, there was no toilet. Not a broken one, not one removed, but nothing. Just smooth wall, gray paint from corner to corner. He stepped back out into the main room, looked at the row from the outside, counted them like maybe he'd gotten turned around, and when he pushed in again, the toilet was back, lid down, tank sweating condensation. Ramos swore it was solid, real as his truck parked outside. But when he touched the porcelain, it felt warm, like a living thing. He didn't say more. He just stopped using that restroom altogether, choosing instead to drive 20 minutes down the road to a gas station whenever nature called. At first, I chalked it up to desert heat and nerves. The work was monotonous, the pay fair but not good enough to justify the stories the men whispered on smoke breaks. They claimed the toilets shifted in number, that the stalls rearranged themselves, that one day there'd be 4 and the next 5, but never the same layout twice. A younger laborer, Hector, made a point of proving everyone wrong. He went in with his phone camera, intent on recording the stalls as evidence. When he came out, his face was dripping sweat through the air inside was cool with the hum of the vents. He had no footage to show, just static-filled frames that looked like gray walls repeating. He tried to laugh it off, but later that night at the motel, he wouldn't come down for dinner. The next morning, his truck was gone and his room key left on the nightstand. Nobody heard from him again. The foreman told us to keep working, that people quit in the middle of jobs all the time, but the rest of us noticed the way his eyes avoided ours, like he'd already called the number on the back of Hector's emergency contact form. I saw it myself on a Wednesday afternoon, when the sun slanted hard against the parking lot and every truck out there gleamed like an oven door. I'd been running wiring through conduits and ducked into the restroom to wash the grit from my hands. The stalls were lined in a row, standard gray dividers, the kind with scratched-up doors that rattled when you slammed them shut. Only when I looked closer, I counted wrong. There should have been 4, but there were only 3. I stepped closer, blinking, my eyes fighting against that buzzing fluorescent light that made the shadows ripple faintly like water. The gap where the 4th stall should have been was nothing but blank cinder block wall. No lines from tiles removed, no plumbing cut off, just smooth and featureless. My heart ticked up in my throat. I left without even turning on the faucet, my hands still black with grease. From then on, I watched. Every day when I passed through, I'd count, and the number never stayed steady. 3 one day, 5 the next. Sometimes the stall doors hung open, sometimes they were shut tight. Once I found them all locked. But the silence inside was oppressive, not even the echo of a breath. When I bent down to check under, expecting to see a row of shoes, I saw nothing. But I swear on my mother's grave, as I straightened up, I heard air moving, steady and deep, like lungs in the dark. I left before I could convince myself to check again. The desert does things to a man's head. At night in the motel, the wind pressed sand against the windows and the sound carried a hush like whispering voices. More than once I dreamed of standing in that restroom, looking into a row of stalls that stretched much farther than the building. Aloud, an endless corridor of doors receding into blackness. I'd wake with grit on my tongue, my teeth dry, my ears ringing with the memory of that breath. The project wrapped in late October. By then, 3 more men had left without notice. Tools abandoned mid-shift, paychecks uncollected. The company sent replacements, but even they grew spooked, their work slowing to half-pace as rumors thickened. Nobody spoke aloud about it in front of the foreman, but everyone knew we were hammering and painting on a place that wasn't right. On our last night, a cold snap rolled in, the desert dropping to near freezing after sundown. I had to check a breaker panel near the back before we packed up for good, and I found myself alone in that building for longer than I liked. The restroom lights were on, humming steady, and I couldn't help glancing in. This time there were 6 stalls, lined like soldiers, all closed, each door trembling just faintly, as if someone inside pressed a palm against them in rhythm. My chest locked up. I backed away, my boots loud against the tile, and I didn't stop until I was outside, under the freezing wind, my breath making white clouds in the dark. We left the site finished, at least by the foreman's account. The rest stop opened to the public a week later. I never drove back, never wanted to see it in daylight or any other. But months after, I heard news from a cousin who drove long-haul rigs. He said a fellow trucker had gone missing after stopping there one night. His rig found idling with the lights on, cab empty. Troopers chalked it up to crime, maybe cartel-related. But when they checked the cameras inside, all they saw was the man walking into the restroom at 2 a.m. He never came back out. Not on any angle, not through any door. Just gone. Like he'd stepped into a stall that wasn't there and kept walking. And now whenever I drive the highways west of El Paso, I hold my bladder until I'm well past that place, no matter the ache, because I know what's waiting in there behind those rattling doors, shifting in number like it's still under construction, never finished, never stable. The desert keeps its secrets in silence, but I can still hear it if I think too hard. That low breath, steady and patient, waiting for the next man to step inside. Highway 59 past Livingston always felt longer at night than it did in the day. A ribbon of asphalt that seemed to stretch out farther with every mile marker. The pines leaned over it like eavesdropping giants, their dark bodies hemming in the road so that the headlights carved only a narrow throat of space to see through. I had been on that stretch plenty of times, usually to visit my uncle in Nacogdoches, and it had always been a lonely drive, the kind that made you turn the radio up, just to keep the silence from pressing too hard. But that night, coming back, south toward Houston, I didn't have the radio on. I wanted quiet and I got it, more than I bargained for. The rest stop appeared out of nowhere, the way they do when you've been driving too long, its floodlights cutting the blackness like stadium lamps. I was tired, eyes gritty from the road and pulled in to stretch. The lot was nearly empty except for an old Ford pickup parked crooked across 2 spaces. No one in sight. I stepped out into the hard wash of light, the gravel crunching under, my boots louder than I expected, like every sound had been magnified. The pine woods crouched just beyond the light's reach and the highway hummed faintly with the occasional 18-wheeler that blasted past. That's when I saw her. She stood near the vending machines under the brightest lamp, pale as milk, against the dark trees. Her nightgown was thin and fluttering even though the air was still, and her long black hair hung to the middle of her back. She had a brush in one hand and was pulling it slowly through her hair, stroke after stroke, her head tilted slightly like she was listening for something. For a moment I thought she was just a traveler, someone who'd stepped out of her car to shake off the road, but she was barefoot and her skin glowed faintly in that harsh light, almost waxy. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me, just kept brushing. I froze, one hand on my door, my body telling me something my brain hadn't caught up with yet. I couldn't hear the sound of the brush moving through her hair, though I was close enough that I should have. The night air was dead silent. I don't know why, but I called out just a soft, "Ma'am," the way you'd ask a stranger if they were all right. She paused, the brush mid-stroke, and then she turned slightly. Not all the way, not her whole face, but just enough that I could see one pale cheekbone and the edge of her mouth. Her lips, moved as though she were speaking, but no sound came. I felt something shift inside me, the way you feel standing too close to the edge of a roof, a kind of vertigo in the gut. Then she dropped the brush. Only she didn't. It slipped from her fingers. I saw it fall, turning in the air, but before it hit the concrete, it simply vanished. The brush blinked out of existence like a bad cut in a film reel. My breath hitched in my throat and I heard myself whisper, "Jesus Christ." When I looked back up, she was gone. Just gone. No fading out, no walking away. One heartbeat, she was there, and in the next, she wasn't. I told myself I was tired, that maybe I'd hallucinated, but the air around me felt heavy, charged, like the pressure before a storm. I didn't stick around. I climbed back into the car, slammed the locks down without meaning to, and tore out of that rest stop faster than I should have. But even once I was back on the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left her behind. Every time my headlights caught a reflective sign, I half expected to see her standing by the shoulder, hair streaming, gown glowing pale in the night. It was a week before I told anyone. My buddy Carl, who drove trucks up and down Texas, was the first. I didn't expect him to believe me, but he didn't laugh. He just nodded like I'd joined some unspoken club. He said, "Highway 59 near Livingston, right? The woman brushing. Her hair." My stomach turned over when he said it that plainly, like she was an old acquaintance. He told me truckers had been talking about her for years, always the same details. The pale woman, the brush that disappears, the silence that follows. Some said she died in a wreck in the 70s, thrown from a car in her nightclothes. Others swore she wasn't human at all, just some spirit tied to the pine woods. Carl leaned closer and told me the worst part. One trucker swore he saw her in his passenger side mirror, sitting in the cab brushing her hair, even while he was moving, at 70 miles an hour. I didn't sleep right for a long time after that. Every time I thought back to the way she looked, the way her brush had simply blinked out, I got the same crawling sense that she hadn't just been a vision. She had been solid, real enough that my mind kept insisting she was flesh and blood. That was the part that ate at me. She wasn't like a shadow or a faint blur the way you imagine ghosts. She looked alive until she wasn't. Months later, curiosity got the better of me and I drove that stretch again at night, slowing as I neared the same rest stop. The floodlights were still there, humming and buzzing over the empty lot, but it was deserted. I didn't stop, not this time, but as I passed, I swear I saw a pale figure between the trees, just outside the light's reach. My eyes flicked forward quick, and when I dared glance back in the mirror, the figure was gone. But for a second I thought I saw something dark lying across the back seat, a long strand of black hair curling across the upholstery. When I pulled over in Livingston to check, the seat was empty, clean as it had been when I left. I don't drive Highway 59 at night anymore. If I can help it, I take another route, even if it adds hours. I know what I saw and I know what I felt, and I'll never forget the way she turned just slightly, lips moving soundlessly, as if she had been about to say something meant only for me. Some nights when it's quiet, I think I hear it still. The faint scrape of a brush through long hair, a sound that shouldn't carry but somehow does. And I wonder if I had stepped closer, if I had dared to listen harder, what words I would have heard spill from that pale mouth under the floodlights of Highway 59.